Okay then. Wait, maybe I should adjust this. All right, now, okay then. Hello and welcome to question and answer number. The numbers are getting so high that they're numbers that are used primarily by astronomers at this point. So I won't even bother telling you what number it is because it's such a high number, it would take up too much time. And before I start answering questions, I forgot to tell you, I am your host, Panyobasa, as usual. So before I start answering questions, there's kind of a core agenda that I should discuss here before I start answering questions. That is, with regard to previous questions that I answered, it has occurred to me that I should have said something else or something in addition to what I already said. For example, a few Q&As back, somebody asked me if I'd come up with any more great comforting thoughts, or if there were more great comforting thoughts than were on my little list of 3 great comforting thoughts. And I couldn't think of any, but it turns out that there's this one thought that used to arise in my mind again and again. Like when I'd be under stress or something, I'd be in a bad situation, it would just spontaneously arise, which would have like a minor soothing effect. Sort of like taking an aspirin or something has this minor, like, beneficial effect. And that was, everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. If shit's going sideways, stuff's not turning out the way it's supposed to turn out, or it's turning out and it just, I guess it would have to turn out the way it's supposed to turn out, because everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. So it was just like this. It wasn't exactly a mantra. I wouldn't keep repeating it, but it would just arise spontaneously again and again, especially when things were happening that I didn't like very much. So that was kind of a comforting thought, that everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. And also, I believe it was in the previous Q&A, I made the stupid mistake of saying that the scientific name of the Pacific or Alaskan pollock was Merluccia producta, and that turns out that's the Pacific hake. That the Alaskan pollock, the largest fishery in the world at the time that I was involved in it, back in like the 1980s and probably the 90s also, it's, at the time it was Theragra calcogramma. And it turns out, I was just making sure, I looked it up on Wikipedia. It turns out, according to Wikipedia, it says, in 2014, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced that the official scientific name for the fish was changed from Theragra calcogramma back to its original taxon of Gadus calcogrammus, highlighting its close genetic relationship to the other species of the cod genus Gadus. So Gadus is like Latin for codfish, and the pollock is sort of a kind of semi-cod, or I guess it's really a cod now. But it's just weird to me that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration would announce that the scientific name of some fish has been changed. That's not their job. Anyways, this is my beverage. This is the little paper umbrella in my beverage, signifying my class and high social status and so forth. And so, with that core agenda as a brief introduction, instead of the usual haphazard rambling, I'm going to start answering questions. And the first question, after I check to make sure we really are recording, I guess. The first question is from Esoteric Boy. And Esoteric Boy says, can you explain this karma situation? A gray Korat cat born on the streets wanders into the open garage of a man who just happens to be kind and takes the cat in. Things get even better when a roommate moves into the house who also loves cats and provides more attention to him. In the cat's next life, is he just more likely to be born directly into a home with kind owners, having defeated the street karma in this life? What is your opinion on cats? especially the korat, which is said to be a good luck cat in Southeast Asia. Oh, that's a whole different question there. And we do have quite a lot of questions. This could be a long one. And now it's going to be even longer because there's like this new extra question. Oh, now it's 3 questions. 3 question marks. So, what is your opinion on cats, especially the korat, which said to be a good luck cat in Southeast Asia? And could a cat with good karma like this increase the karma of its owners? So let's just get back to the first question mark. So the situation of a gray korat cat, and tell you the truth, I'm not exactly sure what a korat cat is, spelled K-O-R-A-T. I don't know. I think I've probably heard of a korat cat before, but I don't exactly know what a korat cat looks like, and I didn't bother to look it up, like I looked up the scientific name of the Alaska Pollock. So, let's see, born on the streets, wanders into an open garage of a man who just happens to be kind, takes the cat in, and then the roommate loves cats too. In the cat's next life, is he just more likely to be born directly into a home with kind owners, having defeated the street karma in this life? Well, it's gonna depend on the individual cat. I'm pretty sure. I mean, it may be that he had burned off this negative karma that was causing him to be a stray cat, and he had this latent underlying karma of people being nice to him. But then it could be the other way around. I mean, it could be that he did have this little bit of people being nice to him karma that then got burned off by the people being nice to him, and now he goes back to being a stray cat in the next life. It could be either way. But in general, I think for most animals, interacting with humans is a kind of uplifting experience. There's like mental states are contagious. Human beings, regardless of how much of an asshole they might be or how much of a saint they might be, still they have like more consciousness, more force of consciousness than the average quadruped. And so just interacting, there's like this empathy, kind of quasi-telepathy, or like a deep level of emotional telepathy going on between, a human and its pet. And so it does have like an uplifting experience. It was one reason why dogs and cats like attention so much. Sort of like the same way little kids like attention so much. They just thrive on it. And to some degree, they need attention. So in this case, I would guess in more than half of cases, it may be that the cat is sort of transitioning into a better kind of life. And who knows, maybe in its next life, it'll be born as like a human baby that dies at 6 months or something. Because I do have this theory that it just kind of occurred to me because of one of our dogs, that dog may have been, like a human baby at some point. And then, before it got to like the verbal level, it died of the diseases that most babies died from before modern times. So, it's hard to say with regard to karma. You can't really generalize exactly how something works. I mean, there are some suttas in the Pali texts, the Pali suttas that say, if you're angry in this life, then you're going to be ugly in the next life, or you feed an animal in this life and it's going to cause benefit to you for 100 lifetimes afterwards, this kind of thing. But I don't think that such cookbook explanations really can do justice to this unthinkable complexity of how the universe works and how karma works. And karma is a mental state. It is volition or will. So, is he just more likely to be born directly into a home with kind owners? In many cases, but it's not necessarily going to turn out that way. I mean, the cat might have just burned off what good karma was coming to it. But then again, it would depend on the mental states of the cat more than anything else. If it's just sort of like this sourpuss of a cat that doesn't like people all that much, it could just be burning off what little people being kind to it karma it had, and then it goes back to being half wild or whatever. Or if the cat is like this really nice cat that's like rubbing up against people's legs, purring all the time, then there's a good chance that it's going to be moving upwards. It's going to have an improved situation in its next life, going with the theory of karma. But you can't really generalize. It's on a cat-by-cat basis. And so I'm just going to move on to Esoteric Boy's second question here. What is your opinion on cats, especially the korat, which is said to be a good luck cat in Southeast Asia? Well, again, I'm really not exactly sure what a korat cat is. Most of the cats that I saw in Burma were pretty much like Siamese, like a Siamese cat, except they're not necessarily the coloring of a cat that's called a Siamese cat. Some of them were just black. There were some tiger stripy cats, but I have read, or I was told, that a genuine Siamese cat has a kink in its tail. And cats in Burma, lots and lots of them have a kink in their tail. It's some sort of genetic quirk that causes like the abnormal fusion of two vertebrae in its tail, which causes this kink. And a lot of them have that triangle-shaped head that I just do not like. I like a round-headed cat better than a triangular-headed cat. I'm not exactly sure why. I think they're just more intelligent or something. I just had bad experiences with triangular-headed cats, I think. They're just like really loud. Like the standard Siamese cat is just like meowing really loud in this piercing voice all the time. But as a general rule, I like cats. We had this one cat at a monastery I lived at. It was named Cat Number 2. And that cat, we could not feed that cat. It was such a huntress. I mean, we found it as a kitten. There was a flood, and apparently the mother and the kittens got separated on opposite sides of the floodwater, and they were half-starved kittens. So the other monk who lived at the monastery and I liked cats, and so we started raising them. We were feeding them. At first, they'd eat. They'd eat like fried fish from our bowl, fried whole minnows and that kind of thing. They liked it. They grew up. And Cat Number 2, just without even having a mother teaching her how to hunt, she was such an adept huntress that she would turn up her nose at fried fish out of our alms bowls, anything like that. She just wanted to hunt her own food. And she was taking out like 3 squirrels a week, in addition to birds, lizards, grasshoppers, just snakes, frogs, just anything. One time she just jumped up in the air and just caught a swooping bird between her paws. And at one point, she was wiping out the squirrels so mercilessly that I even hung a little jingle bell around her neck. And still she was taking out like 2 squirrels a week at least. And then she went into heat and got the lust wander and wandered away and never came back, and might have been eaten by an eagle or a falcon or something. Or by the villagers, because in Burma, villagers do eat cats, especially poor villagers. Dogs, not so much, but cats are considered to be good eating, and so you don't see a lot of stray cats in Burma. You don't see a whole lot of cats in general in Burma. So, yeah, I like kids. I like dogs better. I'm more of a dog person than a cat person. Dogs are more human than cats are. That there's more of a deeper bond between a man and his dog than between a man and his cat. But cats are fine as a general rule. I mean, there are exceptions. There are some cats I haven't liked, some dogs I haven't liked. So, and I don't know what a korat cat is. So I'm just going to move on to the third question of Esoteric Boy, which is, could a cat with good karma like this increase the karma of his owners? That, yeah, I mean, if you are like expressing love and kindness and generosity towards your cat, I mean, you're feeding it every day, that's good karma. You are feeding another being, which is bound to come around, the other way, where, there's going to be like higher beings will smile upon you when you are smiling upon beings that are sort of below you on the grand scale of things. So, yeah, I used to tell that to Burmese people sometimes. It's like, if you want the gods to be kind to you, you should be kind to beings that are below you, because you are below the gods, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, anything that's motivated by kindness, anything that's motivated by love. And I mean, sometimes it's like cats will like demonstrate their sincere love for you by just, they kill some lizard or mouse or something and they just bring it to you. I mean, sometimes it's just like a shrew that doesn't taste good, so they're just kind of dumping it off on you or something. But sometimes, I mean, there's like mutual love and benevolence and so forth. Maybe not so much as with dogs, but still, cats can have it. So yeah, I mean, if you're treating a cat nicely, with kindness and love and feeding it and, just taking care of it, then yeah, of course, there's going to be some karmic, what goes around comes around kind of stuff going on. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Trzaskaziz, who is going under the alias recently of Captain Bogumik Klamka. And his first question is, they never invited you to Buddhist conventions and some Australian monk tried to erase you from his website. Why people or other monks didn't like you when you were a monk? I just wonder why some monks are popular and others are not. I assume there are very wise monks who live in some remote forest in Sri Lanka or Thailand, and the last thing they want is to be popular. Yeah, being popular in Asia especially can be inconvenient. You've got visitors coming, you got people like showing up and wanting to like a tour of your cave. It's like if you're a lay person, you got people, it's like people knocking on your door just asking, can I come in and look around in your bedroom? Because that was happening to me pretty often when I was becoming more and more famous in Burma. People would be coming from the nearby towns to visit the exotic foreign monk living in the cave in the forest, and they're wanting to look inside the cave, and of course it's like going around looking in my bedroom and all that. But one reason why I was never invited to Buddhist conventions is simply I didn't have the connections. Like the monk who was ordained at the same ceremony as me, he got invited to some big, I can't remember now if it was a Buddhist convention specifically or whether it was just sort of like a religious convention with representatives of different religions all coming and giving speeches about how all the religions should, like cooperate and join together and be a force for good in the world or some such. And the thing is, he was a disciple of Usilananda, who was a relatively high-profile monk in Burma and in the United States. Usilananda was the founder of the big Buddhist monastery in Half Moon Bay in California. It was in Daly City before that. And so Usilananda had connections, and so his disciples also have connections, and I really didn't have connections. I was like a hermit living alone in a forest. So with regard to invitations to conventions and that sort of thing, I mean, it wasn't that they were biased against me. It wasn't like they despised me. It was just like, no, they hadn't heard of me really. There have been a few like senior monks, like Sayadaws in Burma, who just took an instant dislike to me. One of them was my own preceptor. One of them was Upandita, Mahasi Upandita. That when I was ordained, he was at my ceremony, and he was like grandpa. He was just very nice when I first became a monk. But then like 7-8 years later, I show up at his monastery, his meditation center in Rangoon, Pandita Rama, and I mean, he just like took this instant dislike to me. I don't think he even remembered me from the ordination ceremony, and it's probably just an older guy who is doesn't like sort of cocky young monks or foreign monks. I was told he didn't like foreigners, so that was probably part of it. Let's see. Then there's some monks. It's mainly like leftist Western monks don't like me because I promulgate hate, which is, it's gonna come up lower down on the scroll of questions here. It's like I'm a fascist, a Nazi, misogynist, whatever, anti-Semite. So the more left-leaning Western monks may dislike me simply because they don't like my politics. And I was controversial, even like living in Burma. I was controversial simply because I had a critical mind and wasn't just accepting everything in the text. Like, I was pretty outspoken in my contempt, I guess, for the Abhidhamma Pitaka, just Abhidhamma philosophy in general, because at least half of what is considered to be Abhidhamma philosophy isn't even found in the Abhidhamma texts themselves, but is found in commentarial literature, like Abhidhamma commentaries and so forth. Some of the most important features of Abhidhamma philosophy aren't even found in the Abhidhamma Pitaka. It's found in the commentarial tradition, which does indicate that Abhidhamma was like growing and evolving and developing over time. And even after the Tipitaka got closed and you couldn't add to the Tipitaka anymore, which generally was when they started having published commentaries, like line by line commentary. You can't really change much after that. So I was kind of controversial, but the Burmese, as a general rule, aside from a few Sayados who just took an instant dislike to me, partly, I mean, just because they don't like foreigners. Like my own preceptor, he just thought I was wild. I was like a loose cannon because, again, if I would just follow Vinaya as strictly as I could, and if some monk, like my preceptor, this happened more than once, he would do penance for a Sanghadisesa offense. You don't know what Sanghadisesa offenses are, that's fine, but you got to do a penance for it. And they would just like fudge the penance. They wouldn't do the penance correctly. And so I would just refuse to go to their reinstatement ceremony, which was seen as just unthinkable. I mean, it was just barbarism to the Burmese mind, where you defer to the abbot, you defer to the senior monks. And I just wouldn't do that. If I thought they were obviously wrong, I just wouldn't go with it. So there were various reasons why. Let's see, what's the actual question here? Let's see, why people don't like you when you were a monk. Yeah, I mean, it was just a few. I mean, relatively few. Most Burmese Sayados, most Burmese monks liked me fine. And some of them like really admired and respected me just because I was like this Buddhist Rambo living out in a cave in the forest. Or just even when I was living in a school monastery, I'd go for alms round every day instead of just going to the refectory and eating food that was given out there. But I was controversial for not being just strictly dogmatic and, you know, sort of using critical thought and just sort of pointing out what I consider to be like discrepancies in the philosophy and so forth. You know, like I had monks at the school monastery talking for quite a while about the idea is that the Buddha was wiser than any of his disciples. The Buddha was just wiser because he was a Sama Sambuddha. And then his chief disciple, Sariputta, was wiser than any of the other disciples. And I just point out, according to the Abhidhamma philosophy itself, that wisdom, panya, is synonymous with amoha, or absence of delusion. So if you have zero delusion, you've got maximum panya, just by definition. And all enlightened beings, all arahants, have zero delusion. So how could the Buddha be wiser than any other arahant? Or how could Sariputta be wiser than any other arahant? And the Burmese, it's like they cannot bring themselves psychologically to question their own religion, which is, well, most religious people are, I suppose. If they're devoutly religious, you know, they just follow. They're not trying to they're not trying to notice discrepancies or contradictions or anything like that. But I mean, that wasn't really why anyone would dislike me. I think aside from those few Sayados, the only people that have really disliked me have been like Westerners that just didn't. I mean, Western monks. The only Western monks who have disliked me were just mainly monks who leaned leftwards and just didn't like my politics. But that's not why I didn't get invited to conventions. And I've spent a lot of time answering this question. So I'm just going to move on to Cherzaska's or Captain Bogumik Klomka's second question, which is what kind of umbrella with mosquito net that you had as a monk? Was that the same what Thai monks use when they go on Dutanga? Yeah, it was. In fact, I would call it a Dutin tea in Burmese, which is like the Dutanga umbrella. So, yeah, I mean, it was a jumbo-sized umbrella so that you could kind of sleep underneath it. You know, it would kind of keep you dry if you slept underneath it. So it was relatively wide, you know, maybe 4 feet across. Detachable handle, little hook on the top that you could hang it from a tree branch or something. And it had like this very fine mesh mosquito net that you could hang from the umbrella. And then that would keep the mosquitoes off when you're like meditating or sleeping underneath this umbrella. And it was imported from Thailand. I got it from Thailand. So yeah, that's the same kind of monk umbrellas that the Thai monks use when they go for Dutanga. The Pra Tudong, it's called in Thailand. And so I'm just going to move on to Cherzaska's third question. Captain Klomka, what is your opinion on neurobiology view that we do actually have two senses of self, one in left brain hemisphere and one in right? One is where your language and continuous experiences are located, and the other one is silent artistic, where subconsciousness is because it doesn't deal with words. When during certain medical procedures they disconnected the bridge between two hemispheres, they found out it is true, but we don't feel that way because one sense of self is silent. Good stuff to explore. So what is my opinion on the neurobiological view that we have two senses of self? I would assume we have more than two senses of self. I mean, what he's talking about is just we've got sort of like a functional asymmetry in the brain. And so long as let's just assume for the sake of argument, physical matter exists, we really have like this physical brain. And back in like the 1970s, it was like the golden age of experimental brain surgery back then, like the 60s and 70s. And it was an effective treatment for severe epilepsy, where you cut through the fibers that connect the two hemispheres, and it reduces epileptic seizures, because epileptic seizures is like an electrical storm in your brain. So it's like a mutual feedback thing that just gets out of control. Whereas if you divide the brain into two hemispheres, you know, without the interconnection, it very much reduces the likelihood that they'll have grand mal seizures. So, yeah, I mean, it's not really controversial, you know, going with neurophysiology, that you've got asymmetrical function in the brain, that the right hemisphere is more like analytical and verbal. No, the left hemisphere is more analytical and verbal. The right hemisphere is more intuitive and not really more emotional, because you've got the emotional parts of the brain are down in the center below the cortex. You know, like the lizard brain, that's where the emotional stuff happens. You know, the amygdala, you've got two of those, one on each side, and that's largely responsible for like anger and aggression and that kind of thing. So, let's see. What is my opinion on the neurobiological view that we do actually have two senses of self? I don't know if it'd be two senses of self. And I think you could multiply that into several senses of self depending on how you want to look at it. But I would agree that the way science has, you know, examined the data, that the two halves of the cortex have asymmetrical function. And I do think that was one of the innovations of modern humans that helped us to outcompete other like pre-modern humans. Like maybe Neanderthals still had like symmetry, and you can like fit in more stuff if you got asymmetrical brain function. Like, you know, music appreciation is like the right temporal lobe, that kind of thing. But not the right temporal lobe, not the left temporal lobe. So, I mean, it just increases the amount of specialization that your cortex can do. And so I do think that was like an evolutionary innovation that just helped modern humans to outcompete all their like pre-modern, pre-quasi-human competitors. Whether Neanderthals had asymmetrical like cortical function or not, I don't know. So I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from Psst. And Psst says, would you say that karma is uniquely Indian? Seems to me that karma is the spiritual backbone of Indian spiritualism. In other words, if anyone wanted to add a new spiritual perspective, it better have karma in its recipe to even be considered viable, or rather digestible. So I wouldn't say that karma is uniquely Indian. There are some kind of vague karmic ideas outside of India, like this. Even in the Bible, you've got he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword, or as ye sow, so shall ye reap. And that's fairly karmic. You know, it's like you do this, it's going to come back to you. And I mean, that kind of idea at the really basic level is if you do bad, bad will happen to you, mainly from God smiting you, like going from like Old Testament or like the Quran or something. You know, it's sort of, rather than karma being either a mental state like in Buddhism or just some sort of, I mean, it's like a substance in Jainism, like this sticky substance that clings to your jiva or your soul and weighs it down. Or, I mean, a lot of people's interpretations of karma is different from that, where it's just some sort of as yet undiscovered law of physics of sort of like Newton's idea that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So that's kind of the way I understood karma before I studied Buddhist philosophy. It's just sort of every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's just sort of like the universe remaining in balance. You know, you push this way, there's going to be pushing back the other way. And it wasn't until I started studying Buddhist philosophy that I realized that karma is much closer to Schopenhauer's concept of will, that it's cetana or volition in Buddhist philosophy. So it's like the momentum, the kinetic aspect of your delusional mind that's just pushing you through samsara. But considering that karma has various interpretations, various ways of looking at it, then I don't think it's uniquely Indian. It might be primarily Indian, but I don't think it's uniquely Indian because, I mean, how are you going to exactly define karma when various philosophical schools in India define it differently? You know, the Buddhists define it differently from the Jains, who define it differently from the Hindus. And even within Buddhism, there was some disagreement on exactly how karma worked or exactly what it was. And literally, karma just means action or deed. And I mean, there are some theories. I mean, what I consider to be the most probable likely theory is that an idea of karma came all the way from the Indus Valley civilization. It probably wasn't as sophisticated as the Buddhist understanding of karma, but still they had some idea of there is this, your actions leave this like long lasting effect that will come back on you, and that you need to kind of purify that in order to escape from samsara, that kind of thing, which is kind of what the Jains believe. But there's another theory that karma, which means action, could have evolved just within the Vedic tradition itself. And that's just, it was the act of karma was like the ceremonial act of the fire sacrifice, that you had to do the act within the sacrifice correctly in order for it to be efficacious. And so that kind of evolved into this idea of karma, although I'm more inclined to think that the whole belief in something akin to karma goes all the way back into prehistoric times, like the Indus Valley civilization or other civilizations that are less well known in northern India. So let's see here. I do think that karma does make more sense. Some interpretation of karma does make more sense than just having some god capital G God up in heaven somewhere who's just scrutinizing everybody and just sort of, remembering, kind of like Santa Claus, whether they're naughty or nice, and then punishing the bad ones and rewarding the good ones and all that. I think it's more of a natural phenomenon than a supernatural one of some deity who's rewarding the good and punishing the bad. That we reward ourselves and punish ourselves. If we go to heaven, we send ourselves there. If we go to hell, we send ourselves there. And there's always a certain element of that, even in monotheistic religions or Abrahamic religions, but they haven't completely gotten away from the whole, God punishes the bad and rewards the good, instead of just kind of leaving it all on our own shoulders. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Thermal Squid. And Thermal Squid says, would employment as a drill instructor be considered wrong livelihood? And then he's got this little commentarial paragraph here saying, when the Buddha and Dhamma condemn militarism and war and any industry related, I wonder if there is a wholesome element in participating in the cultivation or perfection of others through aggressive and unconventional means. Discipline, loyalty, and other kinds of masculine virtues are developed by people like this, and even edgy types of sport coaches have similar characteristics. I also feel that it is a constructive way for people with aggressive tendencies to sublimate what could otherwise result in crime or domestic tragedy. So getting back to the question, would employment as a drill instructor be considered wrong livelihood? I mean, if he's not actually killing anybody, but I guess he'd still be teaching others how to kill. I mean, you do have to learn, like my father said in World War II, you receive instructions on how to stab people in such a way. You stab them in the kidney, and it hurts so bad that they can't make any sound, that kind of thing. Then, yeah, I mean, that's not going to be right livelihood, teaching people how to kill, even if you're not killing yourself, so to speak. Still, I mean, so it's going to have some unwholesome elements. But in Buddhism, I mean, there's almost nothing that you could consider pure black or pure white. It's all shades of gray. And so a drill instructor who is teaching discipline and endurance and austerity and like fearlessness, that's going to be good. That's going to have some positive karma for that drill instructor. He's making a man out of these flabby video game players or whatever. He's sort of like a father figure, and it maybe there's a lot of harshness and a lot of punishments. I read about this one guy who was walking around with his hands in his pockets. So the drill instructor made him fill up his pockets with sand and sew them shut. And he was walking around with like 10 pounds of extra weight, just of sand in his pockets, just for the crime, the perceived misbehavior of having his hands in his pockets. And I mean, some of that is like a really fierce drill instructor. They're just going to break you down until you're having like a crisis. And then they're just going to rebuild you into this fighting machine that does not hesitate to follow an order. And I mean, there's good and bad involved in that. It's not all good and it's not all bad. But I mean, there's a lot of that kind of fierceness in spiritual teachers too, like the stereotypical Zen master who's like beating people with sticks. I think it might have been the previous Q&A. I'm talking about how there's this saying in Zen Buddhism, how the meditation hall can be resounding with the shouts of the master and blows from his stick may be falling like rain, but the master abides in silence and stillness. So, I mean, if you're learning like Bushido as a medieval samurai warrior, then certainly there's going to be a mixture of virtue and just flat out, from the Buddhist point of view, badness. Skillful and unskillful. So, all in all, I do think that a soldier, from ancient Indian Buddhist point of view would have wrong livelihood simply because, I mean, even if you're not killing, you have to be willing to kill. You have to be trained how to kill, that sort of thing. So, but still, ethically, it would be a shade of gray. So I'm just going to move on to Thermal Squid's second question. What do you feel about the role of someone like Hercules in the Dharma? And then his commentarial paragraph is, in reading about Greco-Buddhist culture and artifacts, we see Hercules, or Vajrapani, as a protector of the Buddha. It made me think about how the Dhamma could make use of these with barbaric or worldly tendencies as a proxy for militarism, in doing so avoiding sullying the Sangha or contradicting something like ahimsa. I wonder what kind of merit or results come from that kind of occupational position and what thoughts you might have on it. Well, Hercules, he was sort of recruited into the Buddhist pantheon as the Bodhisattva Vajrapani. Probably Vajrapani existed before, and it was just, this happened all the time in classical times. You have Greeks or Romans move into a new area, and in that new area, the indigenous people are worshiping a certain deity. So the Greeks or Romans would just equate that deity with some deity that they already knew. So you had, like Diana of Ephesus, who's mentioned in the New Testament. Great is Diana of Ephesus. And in all likelihood, it wasn't really Diana to begin with. It's just that it just reminded somebody, some classical pagan, of Diana, and so they just equated her with Diana. And Hercules, he was all over the place. There was like Phoenician versions of Hercules and probably like Gaulish versions of Hercules. It was just Hercules, or Hercules, he just made the rounds. It was like he reminded a lot of people of some minor or not so minor deity that was being worshipped out on the frontiers of the empire. So yeah, that happened when the Greeks colonized northwestern India and what is now Afghanistan, which is called Bactria back then. They just saw this Vajrapani, who was sort of a bodyguard of the Buddha, at least in iconography. And so they started carving Vajrapani as Hercules with his club. I don't know if he had like the lion pelt cape like he does in some iconography, but let's see. What's the actual question though? What do you feel about the role of someone like Hercules in the Dhamma? Well, it's sort of like the drill instructor where, Dhamma is not going to endorse killing or like violence. It might have to admit that sometimes violence, like especially in the case of self-defense, is something that it's like a right. It's like a right that you can choose to exercise to defend yourself. But still, Buddhism is just uncompromisingly pacifistic and nonviolent. And then, of course, it moves into cultures that are more violent, more militaristic, samurai Japan being a classic example of that. And also, not just the Zen, there were like warrior monks in Japan that eventually got outlawed because they were such troublemakers. I can't remember what they were called, but they were sort of like the Japanese Buddhist equivalent of like Knights Templar or something. And Knights Templar and the Hospitallers and those monastic warrior groups in the West were similar also. It's just kind of a bastardization of two what you would consider to be incompatible ideas, and then they're just like welded together into something that worked for centuries. So Heracles, he would be, he wasn't really a Theravada. I don't think the Theravadins had Hercules in their pantheon, even as Vajrapani. I think Vajrapani might be mentioned it wouldn't be Vajra, it'd be Vajrapani in Pali. which means like wielding the thunderbolt or wielding a diamond, probably a thunderbolt in this case, like in the hand, thunderbolt in the hand. And I mean, he'd be like a symbolic protector. You know, he'd be using more psychic means to protect Dhamma from heretics or barbarians or whatever, rather than out there bashing them with a club. So, yeah, I think probably the more dharmic approach would be representing protectors of the Dhamma as using their protection in more psychic ways, you know, just forming like a force field, like a protective shield to keep heresy out of the country, that kind of thing, rather than busting heads. So I'm just going to move on to Thermal Squid's third question, which is, what do the Buddhist texts say about heroism and self-sacrifice? And then he's got the commentarial paragraph following it saying, in reading Hindu scriptures, I see often a theme that those who take the ultimate burden of sacrificing themselves for the protection of their family, culture, or even the well-being and safety of others immediately receive moksha and or a heavenly existence. In some senses, I find things like this to be highly beautiful and appreciable, aesthetically speaking, and that they epitomize altruism. I don't think that there is a higher form of selflessness. Jumping in front of bullets onto grenades or running ahead on into danger with no concern for oneself seems to be a ticket into higher births, or even something like apotheosis. Well, I mean, all of a sudden I'm reminded of like the ancient Picts, who would just go into a frenzy before battle. You know, they'd go into battle essentially naked and painted blue, and then they just charge like the Romans or whoever, and the front line would just fling themselves onto the spears of the Romans, which would like weigh down the spears, so that the next wave would just go right over the top and overwhelm the enemy. At least in theory, that's how it was supposed to work. And I don't know if a berserker or someone like one of these Picts is really it's buying himself a ticket into higher births just through like frenzied willingness to die. I mean, even like warlike cultures, ancient like Germanic cultures and the Norse and so forth, like they had this idea that you can't get into Valhalla unless you die in battle, which made them quite willing to just be like these fearless badasses in battle, because they thought, you know, they're going to Valhalla if they die in battle. And it was kind of a disgrace, not only for the Vikings, but for Klingons too, or so I've seen on an episode. It's a disgrace to die of old age. You got to die gloriously in battle. And I mean, there is some virtue to that. It promotes fearlessness. You know, it's certainly not conducive to timidity, but again, it's not all black and white. You know, it's not all black or all white. It's going to be shades of gray, and there's going to be good and bad mixed together. So let's see here. What do the Buddhist texts say about heroism and self-sacrifice? Well, they talk a lot about heroism and self-sacrifice, but it's in spiritual terms and not like military terms. There's a lot of like militaristic symbolism in a lot of Buddhist texts. Like in the Sutta Nipata, there's at least a few suttas where like a monk or the Buddha is referred to as like this all-conquering hero. Like there's one sutta, and I'm pretty sure it's in the Sutta Nipata, where it says it is better to die in battle than to live in defeat. And it's a spiritual battle. I mean, you're trying to defeat your own defilements, your own delusion. I mean, that's the real heroism from a Buddhist point of view. There's a verse in the Dhammapada. I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's better to conquer yourself than to conquer 10,000 enemies on the field of battle. And self-sacrifice. I mean, I think there's quite a lot of that also, especially when you start getting into the devotionalistic stuff like Jataka stories. I'm pretty sure there's a Jataka story, or it could just be a Mahayana Buddhist story about, it's well known about how the Buddha sees this tiger with babies and it's starving. And so he just offers his own, I think he even like cuts his own flesh somehow just to kind of liven up the tiger with the smell of blood, so that, you know, he just offers his own body for the sake of helping this tiger. Or there's the Sasa Jataka, where the Buddha in a previous life is this wise rabbit who is determined he's going to feed any ascetic wanderers that come by. And then this heats up the throne of Saka, king of gods, that when anybody does something outrageously austere like this, his throne gets too hot for him to sit on it. So he has to go down and see what the problem is. And so he disguises himself as an ascetic Brahmin. And this rabbit, this hare, I mean, ascetic Brahmins don't eat rabbit food, so he's just going to fling himself into a fire. How a rabbit built the fire in the first place, I don't know. And he's just going to cook himself to feed this Brahmin, or who he thinks is a Brahmin. But Saka spared his life and the fire didn't burn him. And then as a reward for his willingness to sacrifice his own life just to feed this Brahmin, he squeezes the juice out of a mountain and makes an image of a rabbit on the moon. And that's how the Buddha became the man in the moon, so to speak. So there's a lot of talk about heroism and self-sacrifice, but it's in spiritual terms, sometimes using militaristic symbolism, militaristic language, like the Pasura Sutta, which it uses a lot of militaristic like imagery in the sutta, even though it's kind of discouraging what Pasura wanted. Pasura was, it literally means like hero, but it's about debate, how, you know, this person wants to just conquer his opponents in debate, and that's considered to be an unskillful attitude, and Buddhist monks are advised to avoid these kind of public debates because they happen a lot in India, and it's easy to get sucked into it, just like it's easy to get sucked into some debate on Twitter now. So, yeah, definitely there's praise of heroism and self-sacrifice, but it is non-violent, and it is along spiritual terms, or along spiritual lines. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Captain Knipples, who used to be called Skoladin or Skuladin, I'm pretty sure, because he's got the same kind of bullet points. And he says, would you kindly explain peak form for receiving metta? And then he's got the characteristic Skuladin bullet point. Like the most conducive condition for bypassing the second law of thermodynamics, or better yet, acting as a force multiplier, I'm willing to douse myself with an old glass bottle of Hawaiian suntan oil, liquid magnifying glass, if that matters. So what is the peak form for receiving metta? I mean, it would just be having like a mind that isn't so opaque that the metta can't really shine in. So I assume you would either be in a state of relative clarity, or it could be that you could be in a state of crisis, despair, and then metta can get into you fairly easily just because it's like your shields are down. But I don't think I've never really come across any strategy for maximizing metta intake when others are like radiating it. Supposedly, I mean, you think there have been so many saints in this world and in other worlds too, just beaming metta in all directions, that there ought to be quite a lot of metta in the air, just like there's quite a lot of phone conversations and like internet porn and all this that are just going through our bodies all the time. So I guess just being like, having like mental clarity would probably be your best bet. Try not to be opaque. Try to be at least translucent. And so I'm just going to move on to Captain Knipples' second question here. Concerning book hype, how relatable was your time in Burma to Alan Parrish from Jumanji? And then the bullet point says, in the jungle, you just wait until the dice rolls 5 or 8. and that's 26 years. And I think Jumanji is like was that a movie with like Robin Williams in it? If it was, I never saw the movie. I have no idea what Captain Knipples here is really referring to. So, I mean, I've seen quite a few movies, but Jumanji isn't one of them. And I'm assuming that Jumanji is a movie. I seem to recall Robin Williams being in a movie like that. But I don't know who Alan Parrish is. Maybe it was the role played by Robin Williams, but I really can't say much more than that. So I'm just going to move on to Captain Knipples' third question, which is, what would you advise to people who want to enjoy the world for what it is and be grateful for what there is in life, even if it's mixed with insanity? Well, I mean, reading J. Krishnamurti would be a good start, I suppose. You can enjoy the world and be grateful for what there is in life without clinging to it and insisting that it be this way instead of that way. So, I mean, gratitude will get you farther than indifference, or at least some spiritual teachers say that gratitude will get you farther in life and in a spiritual life than just indifference. But let's see here. What would you advise to people who want to enjoy the world for what it is and be grateful for what there is in life? Well, for one thing, you have to be willing to accept the bad stuff when it happens. Like Ramana Maharshi once admonished one of his disciples that he says, when you pray, you thank God for all the good things, all the blessings, but you don't thank God for the bad stuff that happens. So, I mean, you should thank God for all of it, because all of it, I mean, it's helping you to work out your karma and get you closer to God or the absolute, or whatever you want to call it. So what would I advise to people who want to enjoy the world for what it is and be grateful for what there is in life? I mean, still, you got to take Dhamma into consideration, that the second noble truth is going to be true regardless. Clinging and attachment is the cause of all suffering. So just accept what happens. Be a stoic. Just accept the bad stuff and the good stuff. But if you're like trying to maximize the positive and eliminate the negative, it's just not going to work, because positive and negative are opposite sides of the same coin. If you don't want any negative, you have to eliminate the positive too. And if you want positive, you have to be willing to accept an equal amount of negative. And that's the thing. I mean, if you want to wallow in sensuality, or you want to enjoy pleasures of the senses, then you have to be willing to accept when the opposite inevitably happens. You might consider it to be an equitable trade. You want something so bad that you're willing to accept its opposite when it happens. You want this pleasure so much. You think this pleasure would be an equitable trade for an equal amount of its opposite, then, I mean, that's your choice to make. So just bear in mind that the Four Noble Truths are going to remain true regardless of how you decide to live your life. And clinging and attachment is going to, desire, craving is going to cause suffering. So just do what you do with as little like craving and attachment as you can manage. And if you still have craving and attachment, then you should bear in mind that is going to bear fruit, and there's going to be some pain involved, some unpleasantness involved. And just take that, just accept it with equanimity. When the bad stuff happens, be a stoic. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Quasator. And Quasator says, in the scenario of a formless being reaching arahantship, how does this being develop insight into the nature of sensuality to the point of transcending it if the reality lacks all experience of sensuality? Well, I don't think there is a scenario of a formless being reaching arahantship. It's just the formless realms in Theravada Buddhism are seen as a kind of dead end. Like when the Buddha became enlightened, he was using his divine eye, his Dibba Chakku, to see who he should teach. And first he's considering his two meditation teachers before he was enlightened. And then he realized, I mean, they got into formless realms as a result of these high meditative attainments, these formless jhanas that they had mastered. And so he couldn't teach them. They were just stuck up there for who knows how many million eons. So it's just considered in Theravada Buddhist philosophy that a formless being in a formless realm is in a dead end, a spiritual dead end. And he's going to have to wait, or she, or whatever. They probably don't have gender up there. They're just going to have to wait until they've exhausted their karma there and get down back into a realm where there are bodies. And then they'll have sense organs where they can hear the Dhamma, and then they can learn from that and practice it and so forth. But formless beings, just according to standard orthodox Theravada Buddhism, do not become enlightened. They're just stuck there. I mean, it's extremely blissful. It's the highest possible states, or of the 31 planes of existence, the highest planes are the formless realms. It's the Arupa Loka, the realm of formlessness. But there's no way to make spiritual progress there, because you have no sense organs and you can't practice or anything. At least that's what they say. I'm not saying this based on my own personal experience. So I'm just going to move on to Quasitora's second question, which is, do you think that every being in existence has had the opportunity to become a Sotapanna, and whether or not they chose that path was due to their karma, which was ultimately random? I mean, the Arahant could not have chosen the right turns of the maze in each lifetime leading up to them becoming an Arya unless they had an inner guidance, or it was just random. Well, going with orthodox Theravada Buddhist philosophy, every being in existence at some point has probably had the opportunity to hear Dhamma and practice Dhamma, and most of them probably didn't, or even some who did, they didn't do it enough, and they got merit for that, and then they went up into a higher realm or got better births, and then burned up the merit that they had, they used it up, and then it's like, according to Buddhist philosophy, pretty much every being in existence has been all over the place, all through the 31 planes of existence. We've done it all. Although personally, I think there may be like new beings spawning in this universe. Various ways of doing it. I've discussed it in previous Q&As. So there could be beings that haven't been in existence for very long, assuming that time exists, that just haven't really had that opportunity yet. So let's see here. Okay, I guess I answered that question. That was a relatively quick answer, which makes me feel a certain insecurity, like being the first person to hand in a test in school. But still, I'm just going to move on to Quasitora's third question, which is, do you think that psychic powers that seem to defy physics are possible? Well, duh. Yeah, obviously I do. Physics, the laws of physics can be broken. They're not really laws. They're just, you've got scientists who observe phenomena and see like repeating patterns, which they then, in physics, as often as not, they'll turn it into a mathematical formula, apply the mathematical formula to it and call that like a law of physics. When, really it's a stable pattern that keeps things stabilized, keeps things regular, but still, I do think that the mind the universe is just a projection of consciousness, and mind over matter does exist. So yeah, science can't even explain consciousness really. How is it that electrochemical reactions in this blob of gray meat is causing conscious experience? Science can't even explain that. So, do I think that psychic powers that seem to defy physics are possible? Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, every now and then I think about talented actors or musicians whose work inspired me that died at relatively young ages. I often wonder what great music or films the world missed out on due to their untimely demise. A musician like John Lennon or an actor like River Phoenix comes to mind. What do you think happens to dormant, untapped creative potential if the person dies before they realize it? Does it just evaporate? Does karma or rebirth factor in at all in terms of dormant, untapped creativity? See, what do you think happens to dormant, untapped creative potential if the person dies before they release it? Does it just evaporate, or does karma rebirth factor in at all in terms of dormant, untapped creativity? Well, John Lennon wouldn't really come to mind for me. I mean, he was middle-aged by the time he was murdered or assassinated. And usually creative geniuses reach their peak like in their 20s. Not always, but I mean, some of the greatest philosophical works ever written were written by young men in their 20s. But the person that this reminds me of is John Keats. And probably a lot of you Philistines out there don't know who John Keats was, but he was a romantic poet. And I took English lit in college, and you had like the Romantic era, and it was just sort of like almost like a tradition that the Romantic poets would die young. Lord Byron was in his 30s. I think maybe Shelley was like maybe around 30 when he died. Keats died of tuberculosis when he was in his mid-20s, I'm pretty sure. And I remember the professor who was teaching the class said that if Keats hadn't died so young, he could have been one of the giants of English literature. And this same professor said there were 4 giants of English literature. You had, let's see, Spencer, Shakespeare, Milton, and Wordsworth. So Keats could have been number 5, but he died when he was like in his mid-20s. But he had such talent, and I mean, he just had nowhere to go but up at that point. And then he just dies of tuberculosis because they didn't have a cure for it then. So what happens to that talent? Well, I mean, it's sort of like the Korat cat. I don't think it's going to be the same for everybody. I don't think there's just some cookbook formula that applies to everybody. That it may be that he just sort of used up. I mean, some of these people just kind of, they just kind of flamed out with their creativity karma and used it up, whereas others just had this momentum going. I would assume most of them have a kind of momentum going, so that some bad karma causes, just kind of cuts it short in this life. Then, they'll take another birth where, they just have this momentum going. Like Mozart, he apparently had this momentum going from birth. I mean, he was allegedly composing like symphonies when he was like 7. Probably weren't all that great of symphonies. I mean, you don't hear them on YouTube or anything, but still, I do think that there are some people that they just have a multi-life momentum going. I remember reading in like an old like 1950s edition of Reader's Digest magazine about this guy who, from the time he was a kid, he just had this drive to tame animals. He was just like a natural born lion tamer. When he was a kid, he'd be catching raccoons and taming them, or whatever it was. And he wound up sort of stifling this desire and became like some art teacher at a little liberal arts college somewhere. But still, I mean, he had this. He was still catching animals and taming them until some friend of his, sort of as like a practical joke, sent him a live cougar for him to tame that. And he wound up taming it, and then he sold it to some circus, because tamed cougars were relatively rare at the time. And he just kept gravitating towards becoming a lion tamer until he became one of the main lion tamers for the Barnum and Bailey Circus, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. And so, it could be some kind of music or art or math or whatever it is. Some people, they just build this momentum life after life until they're just born with this amazing talent. So it could be like that too. But it's, it's sort of like the Korat cat, it's not like it's going to be the same for everybody. So let's see here. What do I think happens to dormant, untapped creative potential? I mean, it stays in the karmic stream. I mean, some karma fades out over time and some doesn't, at least going with Orthodox Buddhist philosophy. So I don't think it would just evaporate because, you've got the law of conservation of energy and all that. So it's momentum. It's still part of the momentum. Unless it's just after many lives, the opportunity doesn't arise. Maybe you had some talented musician who nevertheless lived a totally debauched and depraved lifestyle, as some musicians do. And then he winds up, getting life after life of, just bad lives as a result of that. And then maybe some of his musical talent karma will just fade out by the time he finally gets an opportunity to be a musician again. But who knows? And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And Fred says, why do you use the insh'allah expression? And I'm not exactly sure how I started doing that. I think I was saying it even before I went to Bali, where there was an Indonesian monk there that I used to hang out with who would say it sometimes too. He would say it better. He'd say it with a more Arabic kind of intonation to it. It literally means God willing. And I just kind of like the sound of it, inshallah. It's, kind of a poetic kind of sounding expression, I think. And, it's sort of like covering up the God willing to some degree while still meaning the same thing. Because technically, I'm not really a theist. I don't believe in a capital G God unless you interpret it in a very nebulous, amorphous, kind of Upanishadic sort of way. So, but it just means, maybe it's like there's one teaching of the New Testament that I really appreciate. I mean, there's more than one, but one that I really took to heart is this idea of, you don't say, I'm going to go to such and such town and make such and such amount of money, and then I'm going to come back. It's like, God willing, if I don't die first, because you don't know for sure. Ajahn Chah he almost interpreted anatta as just uncertainty, not sure. So in a way, it's just sort of a way of expressing my characteristic, like skepticism and uncertainty about the future. I mean, you don't know, you can't be sure what's going to happen tomorrow. And so I just include that kind of statement as a way of just bearing that in mind. So I'll help you fix your car next week, inshallah. Which just means God willing. And then if you wind up not helping him, well, God didn't want you to help him. So that's the main reason, I guess. And so I'm just going to move on to Fred's second question, which is, does the first sermon contain the Four Noble Truths? And yes, it does. Like the two main things that the Buddha teaches in the first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is considered by tradition to be his first formal sutta or discourse after his enlightenment to the 5 ascetics that used to practice with him, is the middle path and the Four Noble Truths. So that's just like basic Buddhism. It's like the intro to Buddhism right there. Intro to Dhamma. So, Fred, you can just read the sutta and find out what it says if you want to. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from PSA. PSA says, how often do you shape shift? And how often do I shape shift? Well, this body is my shape. Then whenever I move, it's shifting, right? The shape is shifting. See, look at how I'm shape shifting. See? So that happens pretty much all the time. Even when I'm asleep, I'll still roll over, that kind of thing. So my shape is changing in subtle ways, pretty much all the time. It's like when I'm breathing, the abdomen is expanding and contracting and so forth. But with regard to like assuming the shape of a wolf or something, yeah, that must happen when I'm like sound asleep and don't notice, because the only shape shifting I'm aware of is just like moving the shape, the position of my limbs and so forth. So I'm just going to move on to PSA's next question, which is, can you double check if we are in fact recording? And I already checked like 4 minutes into this, but I might as well. Fuck. Nah, shit. We're not really recording, so just a minute. Okay, we're back. And I think we're recording now. Yeah, we're still recording. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to PSA's third question, which is, what's your favorite sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya and why? Well, the very first sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya is sort of a key sutta. It's like in the Nikayas, the first sutta of the Nikayas is generally edited to be first just because it was considered to be so important. And so the first sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya is a cardinal, important kind of sutta where the Buddha is saying, monks, I know of no other form which takes over a man's mind and abides there, like the form of a woman. And it's pretty much true. I mean, even modern science has kind of reinforced that, or what's the word, corroborated that. Like back in the, I think it was the 1970s, they did a psychological study where they would sit somebody down in front of a screen and then flash pictures on the screen. Various pictures, all kinds of pictures. And they would measure whether the person liked what they saw through pupil dilation, because they might lie. They might see a picture of the American flag and say that they like it when really they're just indifferent, that kind of thing. Or they might see a picture of a naked woman and say they don't like it when really they do like it a lot. So just to get rid of the any kind of dishonesty or sort of fudging the answers, they just measure pupil dilation, because when you see something you really like, your pupils dilate. So it turns out that there was only one kind of picture that consistently caused men's pupils to dilate, and that was pictures of naked women. But with regard to the women, there was actually two kinds of pictures that would cause women's pupils to dilate. That was pictures of naked men and pictures of babies. Cute, cuddly, adorable little babies. So I guess that's one of my favorite suttas. And the only other sutta of the Anguttara Nikaya that really stands out in my mind is, I don't even remember what number. In the Anguttara Nikaya is like arranged by numbers. It starts out with ones, then twos, then threes, up to 11. And I don't remember what the number was, what group, what numerical group this sutta is in. But it's various ways that a monk has impure celibacy, that he's living the holy life, like brahmacharya, in an impure way. And some of the examples are kind of sad. I've mentioned this before, but some are pretty obvious, like a monk who lets women massage his legs, that kind of thing. Or another one is a man who he looks deeply into a woman's eyes when he's talking to her. Or one of them is just kind of sad. A man or a monk who would like hide behind a wall and listen to women who are talking or laughing or singing or crying. A monk who will like hang out and watch women bathing in a public like ford at a river, something like that. It was, in a way, it kind of hit close to home with me, because I could never really stop being heterosexual. I've always had a fascination for beautiful women, even when I was a little kid. When I was 4 years old, I proposed marriage to my babysitter, Debbie Sando. So I guess those would be the two. I don't even remember the name of the one where it's got this list of various ways that a monk's celibacy is like impure or contaminated or something. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is, I don't know about this one. This is from Extremely Rare Bird, who has been doing some sort of leftist ranting in the comments a few times over the past several Q&A videos. And there's actually a question mark in this. So it's not just going to be like an anthropological case history that I'm going to comment upon, because there actually is a question mark in this. So, Extremely Rare Bird says, in your last video, you said that Russia has been arbitrarily chosen as the bad guy. I think that might have been a video I did with my friend Brian talking about the Trump phenomenon. I don't recall it coming up in a Q&A, but it's possible. I don't really recall. So anyways, Extremely Rare Bird, I'll start at the beginning. Says, in your last video, you said that Russia has been arbitrarily chosen as the bad guy. Do you claim that Russia is merely acting out of self-defense? Question mark. And then he continues, though. I think it's true that Russia had its reasons for attacking out of feeling threatened, being cornered by NATO, etc. But is it then justified to target Ukraine's civilians, torture them, and steal their children? Apparently, over 700,000 Ukrainian children have been taken by mid-2023. This is not simply a nation acting out of self-defense. It is a nation trying to conquer another. Further, the spin you make on the conflict is that the castrated globalist environmentalists pretty much deserve it, and that Russia is in the right here, and that EU is just a bunch of feminized idiots. That's a fucked up statement to make, which technically I didn't really make, but we can get to that. You apparently have this black and white worldview where one side is completely in the right and the other is completely in the wrong. Oftentimes, the one in the right has balls and brute force. You would think that a Buddhist, at least, would condemn the violence, but no, you instead offer praise for a brutal dictator and murderer. I'm not saying that you owe any explanation to any of this to either side of the war, more that you should be more careful of what you speak. And then he got some pushback from some other people in the comments, and he had his pushback to the pushback. He did make the statement, if one is honest, one would say the same to Panyo Basa as he is spreading hate and propaganda. And with regard to spreading hate, I mentioned it in the comments that hate speech has come to mean nothing more than any speech that leftists hate. There doesn't have to be any hate at all motivating the speech. I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, you could say hate speech would be speech that is motivated by hatred, or you could say maybe hate speech is speech that is calculated to inspire hatred. But neither one of those applies to what I've been saying as far as I know, that I'm not trying to inspire hatred, and I'm not motivated by hatred, other than maybe like the really subtle kind of hatred that can get into just anything in Buddhist ethics, because it's just so subtle that, you know, just the slightest attraction or aversion, the slightest attraction is greed, the slightest attraction is, or aversion is hate. Some of that can get in. But that's like, if you say, you know, I don't like vanilla, then again, that it's like the same kind of aversion. You know, that's hate speech. If you say you don't like vanilla because your dislike of vanilla, technically from the subtle ethics of Buddhist philosophy, is hate. But that's really not what hate speech is, or promulgating hate. It's just anything that leftists or globalists hate. Any speech that globalists or leftists hate is hate speech. That's promulgating hate. I hate what you said, therefore you are promulgating hate. That's essentially the attitude. A person could just make a completely objective statement of what appears to be empirical fact, and still they'll be accused of hate speech. Like you say that there's differences in ethnicities with regard to certain measurable values, or differences between the two biological sexes, And people will just say that's hate speech because it is in violation of their ideology where everyone is supposed to be the same, when you're just making an objective observation. And you don't even necessarily want it to be true. I mean, it would be nice if all the ethnicities had equal talents and skills that are just innate, equal abilities, equal cognitive abilities. It would be nice, but that's not what the empirical evidence indicates. And so if you go with the empirical evidence, you're accused of being a hate monger, even though, I mean, it's not like you want it to be that way. I can say everyone's going to die. That doesn't mean that I want everyone to die. It's just a fact of life. So let's consider the case of California. Let's say California secedes from the Union. And then China starts making deals and like treaties with California and starts planning to like put missile bases in California aimed at American cities. Well, there's no way in hell America would put up with that. There's no way in hell. And that's essentially what Russia is doing with regard to Ukraine, because, I mean, Ukraine was part of Russia much longer than California has been part of the United States. Ukraine was part of like a Russian empire long before the Soviet Union came along. I mean, Kievan Rus is considered to be like one of the founding nuclei of Russian culture, and that's in Ukraine. So it's, I mean, just because you point this out doesn't mean that I think Putin is 100% good and Zelensky is 100% bad. I mean, that's just infantile. There's no way I'd say that. I mean, obviously, Putin is a kind of gangster. But still, in this conflict, if I had to choose which side I would want to win, I'd go with Russia. Even if it means that they conquer Ukraine, which they're probably not going to do. So let's see, is there anything I missed out here? I mean, it's sort of like the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Russians were going to put missiles in Cuba. And it's like, there's just no way America was going to put up with that. And ever since Gorbachev, Russian leaders have been warning, you know, you start like trying to get Ukraine into NATO, you know, putting military bases in Ukraine, that's going to be an act of war. We are going to fight against that. It just makes sense. America would do exactly the same thing. And when I says, let's see, in my last video, I said that Russia has been arbitrarily chosen the bad guy. Well, in a way, they pretty much have. I mean, they could have been our friends right now if there were not certain, like, mainly globalist agents in the establishment that extends beyond the United States that wanted to keep the Cold War going to some degree. And China obviously is a greater threat to American interests than Russia is. Russia may be a greater threat to globalist interests. And with regard to the EU castrating itself, I mean, that's just pretty much of an objective fact at this point. So might does make right from a political point of view. And that's one reason why for many years I had no interest in politics. Most of the time that I was a monk until I came back to America and just saw how fascinatingly interesting it was. I lost interest in politics as soon as I realized that what is right and good from a political point of view is not necessarily right and good from an ethical point of view. That just kicking ass sometimes is the right thing to do from a political point of view. Let's see, there's something else in here. Is it then justified to target Ukraine civilians? Well, I mean, if the Russians really were targeting Ukraine civilians, then you wouldn't have these glaring headlines. You know, it's like Russians like destroy apartment complex, 2 people killed. That if Russia really was trying to kill civilians, there'd be a hell of a lot more dead civilians in Ukraine. And also, there's no mention at all of like the Ukrainians like bombing these separatist enclaves, like what Donbass and the other one. That that was going on before the Russians invaded. I mean, it goes both ways. There's atrocities going both ways. It's always the way it is. To have people try and claim that you've got a war where one side is 100% good, they're wearing the white hats, and the other side is 100% bad, they're wearing the black hats. I mean, it's just childish. So, let's see. Is there anything that I should mention here? Something about stealing their children. I really don't know much about Russians stealing Ukrainian children. Could be that, I mean, there's a lot of refugees leaving Ukraine that are going into Russia. You don't hear about that much either. But with regard to evil Russians, like torture, let's see, targeting Ukrainian civilians very incompetently, apparently. Torturing them, I'm sure there's torture going both ways. You know, there's always going to be atrocities. I mean, when you have a war, when you've got soldiers willing to kill people, then they have to have like this shell, you know, against their own conscience. I mean, it's like they're going to, they harden their heart so that they can do this stuff. And then it goes awry where there's certain people with maybe criminal elements. You know, the reason why they're not in prison is because they joined the military instead. And, you know, cruel instincts come out, dehumanizing instincts come out, and that goes both ways. So, yeah, I mean, you can say war crimes, but I mean, war itself is, I mean, you've already gone beyond any kind of like ethical limits, really, from a Buddhist point of view. So let's see. Furthermore, when you spin you make on the conflict is the castrated globalist environmentalists pretty much deserve it. Well, we always get what we deserve. I mean, just going with the whole Buddhist point of view of karma, I mean, it's the whole system is worked out so that we get what we deserve. The Russians are getting what they deserve. The Ukrainians are getting what they deserve. The castrated eunuchs running the EU are getting what they deserve. And America is getting what it deserves. So let's see. And the EU is just a bunch of feminized. Oh, they're not idiots. I never said they were idiots. They are definitely feminized, but they're not idiots. Let's see. You apparently have this black and white worldview. No, I think that Extremely Rare Bird has more of the black and white worldview than I do. I mean, it's all shades of gray. One side is completely in the right, and no, that's just, I mean, what is happening here is that Extremely Rare Bird is triggered by me saying stuff that he doesn't like, and so he has to twist it into something worse than I said in order to justify bitching about it, essentially. Let's see. You would think that as a Buddhist, at least you would condemn the violence. What would be the point of that? I disapprove of people killing each other. It's still going to happen. And from the political point of view, sometimes killing people is the right thing to do. So let's see. And then at the end, that Panyabasa is spreading hate and propaganda. Yeah, well, you viewers can decide for yourself. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Dama River. And Dama River says, you mentioned in a recent video that having a one-night stand was sexual misconduct. How so? Dama River. What if the woman is single and the man is single and they're both of legal age and they both consent? Would you please explain in more detail where is the sexual misconduct in this situation? I mean, what religion? Buddhism. According to Buddhism, listening to music is immoral. According to Buddhism, putting salt and pepper on your food to make it taste better is immoral. According to Buddhism, being unhappy is immoral. So, I mean, it's like Buddhism has the most finely tuned ethics of just about any spiritual system out there. And then Dama River is thinking that you can just pick up some drunken hoe at a bar and screw her and forget about her. And you're not like wallowing in sensuality. If listening to music is immoral, how would fucking somebody not be immoral? So, gosh, questions like this, it's like, I'm somewhat taken aback. See, look, taken aback. Let's see. So, I mean, it's just wallowing in sensuality. It's something that a good Buddhist isn't supposed to do. I mean, if you're married, then, it's the way of the village, it's Gamadama. And, you have babies, it's just how human race propagates itself. But just having sex for fun, I mean, it's going to be immoral even between a married couple. But you got to draw the line somewhere. So married couples, or just a couple that has formed a pair bond, they're faithful to each other. It's still immoral from the point of view of extremely finely tuned ancient Indian ethics. But it's still, I mean, it's got to be acceptable. Otherwise, the human race is just going to die out, and nobody will support the monks anymore. So you get married, you have kids, or you just form a stable, faithful pair bond, and you have kids. But like wallowing in sensuality just for the sake of wallowing in sensuality, I mean, I don't know how anybody could interpret Buddhism in such a way that would be fine and dandy. Okay. I'm just going to move on to Dhamma River's second question here, which is, what are your thoughts on Alex Jones? And then in parentheses, he's got InfoWars. And I don't really watch Alex Jones much. I mean, he puts out so many hours of content every day that, I mean, you could just sit there watching Alex Jones all day and still just barely put a dent into it, seems to me. I do think that Alex Jones would be fun to just hang out with in a backyard, just have a beer and like do a barbecue. You're barbecuing burgers on a grill. I think he'd be a really an enjoyable person to hang out with. Just spend an afternoon having a beer, eating some burgers in the backyard, sitting in lawn chairs. But I think he's sincere. He's got some kind of extreme views on certain things. But I mean, he's somewhat of a prophet, I think. A lot of these stuff that he's been predicting and so on, it really does happen. But I mean, I'm not so enamored of Alex Jones that I just sit around watching Alex Jones videos. Just very rarely. I might watch 5 minutes of Alex Jones per week on Twitter. He's not on YouTube anymore, I don't think. Except for maybe like an interview with Joe Rogan or something. So, yeah, I'm glad that Alex Jones hasn't been just like sued into oblivion. So, I mean, he has the right to freedom of speech. I think InfoWars is an appropriate name for his channel. So, yeah, my blessings are upon Alex Jones. And I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Gaz. And Gaz says, suppose there are two worlds like our own. One is Maya, an illusion. The other is real. How can we know which one we are in? How would a real material world differ from an illusory material world? Before renouncing the world, this is the issue to address. Absent facts, I can understand assuming it an illusion for the sake of overcoming suffering and for spiritual pursuit, but I also understand assuming it real for the sake of life, love, and happiness. Perhaps both can be true. I regard many Buddhist teachings to be undeniable and beneficial, but recently the more pessimistic or nihilistic aspects have been bothering me. I wish that the lay life were encouraged more. Oh man, there's more question marks. I got to divide this up. Okay. Well, I'll just continue because I didn't separate it until just now. Are there any life-affirming suttas that may help me with this? The Sigalo Wada and the Kalama Sutta come to mind. I understand why there might not be many. I can accept this. If Buddhism is true, it is good to abandon the world to blow out. Not quite so for Mahayana, but should Buddhism be in error, it is a very grim position indeed. Well, let's get to the top here. Suppose there are two worlds. One is Maya and illusion, and the other is real. How can we know which one we are in? I mean, does it even matter? I mean, it's the same either way, whether you realize you're in the matrix or not. I mean, if you realize you're in the matrix, that will definitely affect your attitude. But, I mean, the experiences that you're having would be the same, pretty much. The kind of experiences you would have. And furthermore, I don't think it's even possible, not even in theory, to have a real material world. That, like a multiplistic, pluralistic world. That any kind of pluralism is an artifact of perception. It requires perception, which is symbolism, to create a pluralistic world. It requires, for example, relations. Same as, different from, better than, worse than, bigger than, smaller than. These are all relations that you use to differentiate different things in your field of perception. And every single one of those is a mental state. Like I've said before, like you can have a chemist who's going to separate a sample of some physical substance into its component elements. And he's not going to find any pure same as or pure different from in that sample of matter. That's entirely psychological. It's entirely in the mind. But without that same as and different from, it's as though there is nothing. You've got like this unthinkable void. So, I mean, whether there is some kind of underlying physical reality is almost irrelevant, because we're not experiencing it. What we're experiencing is our own mental states, our own perceptions, and that is samsara. I don't really see how there's any way to get around that. So how can we know which one we're in? I mean, theoretically, I mean, if the illusion is like a shabby illusion, so that you can just drive to the end of the world where it's just like a blank screen or something, you know, that you can somehow like glitch out the matrix, you know, find some kind of way of glitching it out, find some gap or something, then maybe then. But if it's like a really good illusion, a competently designed matrix, there's no way you could tell the difference. Other than philosophically, when you realize that, I mean, it's all mind-made anyway. So how would a real material world differ from an illusory material world? It wouldn't necessarily at all, because you don't experience material. All you can experience is mind. Mind experience is itself mental. There's no way to prove the existence of any material world. Like the philosopher Immanuel Kant considered that to be the scandal of philosophy, that after thousands of years, philosophers still hadn't proved that there is or is not matter. I mean, it's easier to demonstrate that there couldn't be matter, or at least you can get farther in that direction than proving that there is. I mean, you can say, well, I mean, one person goes into a room, sees something there, he leaves. Another person goes into that same room and sees the same thing. But that's not proof that there's physical matter. It proves that there's a kind of order to what the two people are experiencing. But still, I mean, that's no proof at all. You can consider it kind of circumstantial evidence, I suppose. So let's see here. Before renouncing the world, it's how is that even an issue? Whether this material world is real or not, how is that even an issue? From the Buddhist point of view, it's all a matter of the Four Noble Truths. I mean, desire and attachment are the cause of all suffering. So you renounce the world, as a way of like minimizing like, craving and attachment. Whether the world is real or not is irrelevant. Some schools of Buddhism say it is, but it's still sort of like in science, different than we perceive it to be. Whereas other schools of Buddhism say it's all an illusion. But what difference does it make? I mean, that's not the point. Whether this world is real or not, it's still conducive to suffering. And anyone who doesn't want to suffer, anyone who wants to overcome delusion, will renounce this, or at least not cling to it. At least not be like insisting that things be this way instead of that way. Because, I mean, you're just setting yourself up against City Hall at that point. You're never going to win. So, let's see. There's the other question here. Are there any life-affirming suttas that may help me with this? I don't think so. I mean, you can Sigala Wada Sutta or a few other suttas that, you know, are like talking about the duties of a layperson for living a well-regulated, you know, relatively virtuous within the scope of lay life kind of existence. That's about as good as you're going to get. Because, I mean, ancient Indian ethics were pretty much based on the idea that this world, this samsara, is conducive to suffering, and the best thing you can do is to find a way out. At the very least, you should attenuate it, make it more subtle. And that's true whether there is a physical universe or not. Whether the physical universe really exists or not is almost totally irrelevant. It's just desire is the cause of all suffering, regardless of whether there's a physical universe or not. And so you act accordingly. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. So Rui says, I do tend to understand study as a kind of practice. This is sort of a follow-up from, I think, a question he asked in the previous Q&A with regard to studying Dhamma. And so he says, I do tend to understand study as a kind of practice and vice versa. Speaking of which, what would be, according to you, the best Pali term for the Greek notion of praxis? And in Theravada Buddhism, there's sort of a trinity. You've got, pariyati, which is study. So it's like a Buddhist university in Burma is a pariyati jaun. It's like a pariyati school. That's theory. Practice is patipati. So pariyati and patipati. So pariyat and patipat in Burmese. So I guess patipati would be the word for practice. And then it's patiweda or pariweda. I forget the exact prefix, which is the result of the first two, which is like breakthrough into gnosis. Pariweda, like penetration of samsara and illumination, you know, insight, liberating insight. So, let's see. Best Pali term for the Greek notion of practice. I guess it would be patipati. And I don't even remember how to spell it. Whether the T's have dots under them and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Yuga'u. And Yuga'u says, how would you explain people spacing out? And when I saw this question, it reminded me of something my father used to say. My father was an amateur hypnotist. And he would say that even when you're daydreaming, you know, you're spacing out, that's a mild trance state. It's like a mild hypnotic trance. So it's just built into the human species that we go into trance states. In fact, some people like Charlie Tart of the UC Davis, who's probably retired by now, would say that, what most people are doing, what most people are living in is consensus trance. That's what he calls it, consensus trance. That we're not fully awake. We're in a kind of sleepwalking state. And then we're largely puppets to our karma, which is just force of habit. most of what people do, the average normie person, most of what they do in their life is just sort of like through force of habit, and then they're not even fully there. They're not even fully conscious of what they're doing. So I guess that's how I would explain. I mean, I don't know all the fine details of how to explain how or why people are prone to different levels of trance states, but it seems to be like a universal phenomenon in our species. Not just like decadent Westerners who space out. I mean, people have just gone into daydreams, reveries, since prehistoric times, I'm sure, that even just like our prehistoric ancestors staring into a campfire at night, that was sort of a mild trance state too. I mean, that's one kind of nice thing about camping, is just sitting there staring into a campfire. Like when you go to places where campfires are prohibited, it really kind of detracts from the experience of just sitting in front of the campfire, just staring into the flames, spacing out essentially. In that case, it could be like a survival instinct. It would keep little kids from wandering away from the relatively safe fire and getting eaten by hyenas or something. So I suppose I should just move on to Yuga-U's next question. Yeah, I'm just still checking to make sure that we're recording after that fiasco a little while ago. Do you think that amendments and freedom for gamble and small drug use are making people too relaxed? I don't know what amendments are. AMANDMAND. Amendments. See, do you think that amendments and freedom for gamble and small drug use are making people too relaxed? Like we do need some striction and rules, too much bad karma being made. I don't know. I think we're living in just an age of spiritual mediocrity and flabbiness. That there are probably fewer like serial killers, mass murderers now than there were in ancient times. But also there's fewer saints than in ancient or medieval times. So yeah, I think we're just in an age of spiritual mediocrity, but it is sort of declining lately, I think, just through just the collapse of so much of ethics, of like morality. I mean, morality itself is, especially for the left and the globalists, morality has largely been replaced by unrefined feminine sentiment. That what just a woman would naturally feel has become pretty much the same as what ethics has become. Whereas like sexuality or like sensual excess, which is a big thing in most religions, including Buddhism, that's just no longer part of the equation anymore. That's just beyond the scope of ethics at this point. Whereas promulgating hate, saying something that offends somebody else is supposedly immoral. Whereas from the Buddhist point of view, being offended is itself immoral. So, yeah, I do think we're in a decadent age, and it's noticeably getting more decadent over the past few decades, largely because of internet, where people can just vegetate in front of a computer screen. I mean, people were vegetating in front of a TV screen, since before I was born, but it's just becoming too immersive, and you got too many options where the chances are increased of you finding an option that really just sucks you in and just turns you into a vegetable sitting in front of a TV screen, or a computer screen, I should say. And then, of course, you've got just the decline of morals in general, which is largely as a result of like women's liberation, where one of the main goals of second wave feminism, first wave feminism was just giving women the right to vote. Second wave liberation was giving women the right to be just as slutty as men. That's mainly it. They weren't really trying to get men to be more moral. They just wanted to be as immoral as men with regard to sexuality especially. and to some degree like drunkenness, that kind of stuff too. Sensual excess, which, as I say, has pretty much just collapsed. And any like consideration of sensual excess, too much drug use, too much sex, too much food, too much anything that is like a sensual pleasure, it has just disappeared from the ethical landscape, especially for the left, the globalist left, which is kind of an attempt to some degree on the part of some of the people responsible for this of ushering in a brave new world, like in the Huxleyan sense. So I don't know if it's too much bad karma made. It's just too much mediocre karma being made. Because there's a lot of bad karma. I mean, more bad karma in the Buddhist time. Public gruesome executions and murderous bandits in the forests and all kinds of bad stuff. Just sociopathic kings waging war against other sociopathic kings and just laying waste to the villages and farms of the enemy and this kind of stuff. That's been going on for a long time. It's relatively less now. I mean, we're living in sort of a waning, almost like a golden age, or it's just a time of general peace. It's not just wars everywhere and just, sociopathic dictators just doing as they please and just bands of bandits and like sort of mercenary soldiers just preying upon the populace. I mean, it's still happening in certain parts of the world, including Ukraine, I guess, but still it's way less than it used to be. So I don't know what a man-mans are, but freedom to gamble and small drug use, I mean, that's been going on forever, since prehistoric times. Gambling, I mean, ancient times they were gambling, mainly with dice back then, and plus, maybe just betting on this or that. And small drug use, I mean, alcohol's been around for a hell of a long time. So, yeah, people are getting too relaxed. They're getting too lazy and flabby, and which is causing less moral fiber. They've got less determination, fewer principles, maybe, at least principles that are guiding the way they live their lives. So, yeah, I think it's not so much a man-mans and freedom to gamble and small drug use that are making people too relaxed. It's just technology is making life so easy that people just, I mean, it's doing what is difficult makes you stronger. And it's getting to the point where people are just avoiding anything difficult. And that's the way it is kind of at work, where I work too. It's like some people, they just don't want to get off the forklift to like secure something to make sure that everything is going to remain in place. They just drop it off and leave. It's like, for them, the main point is just not fucking up so bad that they get fired. And aside from that, they don't give a damn. And there's always been people like that too. I mean, it might be that it's increasing. Just a work ethic seems to be in decline to some degree. Just taking pride in, or like having enough self-respect that you do a good job just because it reflects on your character, that kind of thing. But mainly I think it's technology is helping to make us weak and flabby because difficulty is becoming less. Just difficulty in life in general is becoming less. Just other than just remembering all your fucking passwords. And then just what is happening to morals, where feminization of Western civilization is just replacing genuine morals with unrefined female sentiment. I would say that those are more important than gambling, small drug use, and whatever a man-mans are. So I'm just going to move on to Yuga Oo's third question, which he says, also, isn't the only free will we have to follow or not to follow precepts, I assume, making ours and lives of others less painful? No, it's not free will. I mean, free will, as I keep saying, I mean, just from the logical point of view, it is impossible. It's a logical impossibility to have free will. That your decisions are going to have a cause or they're not going to have a cause. If they have a cause, they are determined by that cause and are not free. If they happen without a cause, it happens at random. And neither one of those options, and also a combination of the two, is not the same as free will. Albert Einstein, who was no idiot, by the way, used to say that he had no idea what people were talking about when they talked about free will. He was a Spinozan. He followed the philosophy of Baruch Spinoza. And Spinoza also, his concept of God, even God didn't have free will because free will is just logically impossible. Of course, then there's also the empirical evidence that it's like your brain is already, let's see, how does it work? Your brain has already started firing like a fraction of a second before you're even aware that you've made the decision, that kind of thing. So, see, isn't the only like free will we have to follow or not follow precepts? It's your reasons, it's your perceptions that decide whether you're going to follow some precept or not. And if you're going to change your attitude, you have to change your perceptions. That's kind of like in the philosophy of Schopenhauer. He is saying that under the same circumstances, a certain character will always respond in the same way, so that the only way to change how you respond to a certain circumstance is to change your perception, to change your character to some degree. When you see things differently, then your behavior with regard to those things can change significantly. But until that happens, they probably won't. So then again, Ramana Maharshi used to say the only free will we have is with regard to whether we are mindful or not. And I will admit that after reading The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen, he does kind of open this weird door to some kind of free will, where he says that when something becomes self-referential, then paradoxes happen. Like the statement, this statement is false. I mean, it can't be true or false. It's paradoxical because it refers to itself. And so what happens when you have a self-conscious mind, then the mind starts referring to itself, and then paradoxes can happen. And it might be that free will, even though it's logically impossible, might somehow come into existence in some way through this self-reflection, which produces paradoxical situations. So, Orthodox Buddhism does reject free will, and it also rejects determinism. So free will is out, determinism is out, and so you've got this middle way that is never fully explained in the texts, possibly because it's just like this paradox that cannot be fully explained. So, even so, I mean, if you're going to make a decision, you're going to make it for a reason, or you're not going to make it for a reason. And if you make it for a reason, that reason is going to determine your decision. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Bodhisattva 969. And Bodhisattva 969 says, Ashin Ottama was ordained in the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition and Tanjayadama in the Pah Auk tradition, both from the Mutodia forest monastery. What's the difference? So I assume Bodhisattva 969 is asking, what's the difference between being ordained in the Mahasi tradition or being ordained in the Pah Auk tradition? And there are differences between various traditions. There's lots of various meditation traditions in Burma, lots of various meditation traditions in Thailand also. Presumably lots in Sri Lanka too, but I don't know much about Sri Lanka. So Mahasi tradition is essentially very similar to what the Vipassana tradition in the West is doing. I mean, it's the Vipassana tradition in the West, the Vipassana movement, was inspired largely by Mahasi Sayadaw. That some of the first big Vipassana teachers in the West were at least temporarily disciples of either Mahasi Sayadaw or a disciple of Mahasi Sayadaw who was still in the same tradition. And that's vipassana, it's mindfulness, satipatthana. Whereas the Pah Auk tradition, it emphasizes more samatha, more jhana, the cultivation of jhana. That Pah Auk Seattle used to say that you couldn't possibly become enlightened by following the Mahasi tradition, that you have to get some kind of jhana, or at least you have to get upachara samadhi, or access concentration, which is like one step before jhana, before you can become enlightened. Mahasi tradition says no, even just momentary concentration is good enough. So that would be one difference. Also, the Pah Auk tradition has more emphasis on vinaya. That Pah or the Mahasi, some of the Mahasi teachers like Upandita would talk a good game about vinaya and the necessary, how important it is to follow the rules of monastic discipline. But as a general rule, Mahasi centers, like monasteries and meditation centers in the Mahasi tradition tend to be pretty lax with regard to their monastic discipline, whereas Pah Auk tends to be much stricter. So the monks there tend to be more serious as a general rule. But all in all, if I had to choose between one or the other, I'd have to go with Mahasi, just because I don't accept a lot of stuff. Like the Pah Auk tradition puts a lot of emphasis on Abhidhamma and the commentaries and the Patisambhita Magga and all this like doctrinal, dogmatic stuff that I really can't take very seriously. Mahasi tradition depends less on that than Pah Auk does. And Pah Auk, some of the people there, possibly not all, some of the people there think that they're like cultivating jhana when really they're just hypnotizing themselves and seeing what they think they ought to see. That can happen in just about any kind of tradition if you're not careful. But it seems to be easier to have that happen in the Pah Auk method than in the Mahasi tradition. Because the Mahasi tradition is mindfulness. You're still like observing various things and noting them, whereas in the Pah Auk tradition, to some degree, at least in some kinds of meditation, they teach more than one kind at both places, really. You can just kind of go into it more of a trance state, and then you can hypnotize yourself without even realizing that you're hypnotizing yourself. Like I mentioned in a previous Q&A, I was visiting Pah Auk and talking to some young American monk there, and he was talking about how he was meditating on the various parts of the body, and he was meditating on the bones of the person sitting in front of him in the meditation hall. He was seeing with the samadhi eye the skeletal structure of the person who was sitting in front of him, and he was seeing it fairly clearly. And then finally he opened his eyes and realized that the person wasn't even there anymore. They just got up and walked away, and he's still seeing with the samadhi eye their skeletal structure there. And when he pointed this out to his teacher, the teacher said, it doesn't matter. And really, it's just imagination. There was this other monk who had finished the course in Pah Auk. Both traditions have this course, where you get to a certain point and you have completed the course. And he was seeing his own body parts, visualizing them with the samadhi eye, not just imagining them, mind you, but using a kind of clairvoyance to see his own body parts. And for some reason, he saw that his own brain was about the size of an orange. So it's a lot of it is kind of self-deception, although to some degree the Pah Auk method is more difficult to follow, and so it requires more commitment, and you really can get into very deep mental states using the Pah Auk method. There are some teachers of the Pah Auk method who have a reputation for having psychic powers, which is much less likely in the Mahasi tradition. But I guess the main difference between Mahasi and Pah Auk is Mahasi is more vipassana oriented and Pah Auk is more jhana oriented. They say that you should get a firm grounding in samatha before you start cultivating vipassana insight knowledge. And I'm just going to move on to Bodhisattva 969's second question, which is, how did you manage to live as a monk without sex or masturbation for so long? How many monks do you think do it secretly without confessing, because it's unimaginable for me to endure it? Well, it wasn't easy. especially when I was younger, to live as a monk without like spanking the puppy at least. I mean, it's like your body, like a red-blooded young man is going to have like this. I mean, it's beyond just instinct. It's like your body just needs to have an orgasm after a while. So that up until I was in my early 40s, I just spontaneously have a wet dream about every 2 weeks, sometimes more often than that. You know, it's just a pressure release thing. And there were times when I was just so horny, I just wanted to just cry. But I did take my vows, they're not really vows. I did take my obligation to follow the rules relatively seriously. And once a monk starts committing Sangharisesa offenses and not confessing them, not doing the required penance, I mean, that's it. It's just downhill from there. That he's no longer a pure monk. His morality is no longer pure and never will be so long as he doesn't do the penance. And the longer you go without confessing, having committed something like deliberately having an orgasm, then you've got to do penance, not only for the mandatory minimum 6 days and 6 nights, but for every single day that you went without confessing it. So if you go a year or two, then, I mean, it becomes almost impossible because it's really a pain in the neck to do these penances, especially making confession to all the monks at the monastery. So there's actually 2 questions here. So Bodhisattva 969 has transgressed the rule, and his name is going on a list under the B's. So, yeah, I mean, it was just my firm determination not to just break a serious rule like that, just without compunction. And I did do the penance like 3 or 4 times. And because sometimes it's like you're horny as hell, and it may be that your ingazat, your lingam is kamaniyam. And so, I mean, it's all throbby and stuff, and we don't need to go into fine details. And it's like you start kind of not spanking the puppy, maybe petting it a little bit, and then it just goes off. So sometimes after that would happen, it's like you're psychoanalyzing yourself. It's like, did I do that on purpose? I mean, for like a split second, was I like, okay, let's do it, this kind of thing. And it's like you're having to like psychoanalyze yourself. And sometimes if you have doubts, then you just go ahead and do the penance anyway, just to clear your doubts. And one of my teachers did that every year, not so much for masturbation or deliberately having an orgasm. I think it was just from coming into physical contact with women, and just, he apparently enjoyed it. He was kind of a macho kind of a monk. So I don't think he was gay. And so, I mean, some monks, they just brush up against a woman on a crowded bus or something. And it's like, I got to do the penance. So just to make sure, I mean, some monks just do it like once a year, just to make sure. So with regard to how many monks do I think do it secretly without confessing? Probably, I mean, the percentage would probably be in double digits. I hope it's not really a lot, and I have no way of really knowing. But still, I've been told that most novices, most samaneras in Burma actually do spank the puppy. And probably just going cold turkey after full ordination into being a bhikkhu, once you got the habit going, that it's hard to break the habit. So it could be that there's lots of monks. Most Burmese monks really don't try to follow the rules very strictly. So, yeah, but I really can't say how many, but I'm sure that it's above 10%. And I would dearly hope that it's less than 90%. So I'm just going to move on to Bodhisattva 969's 3rd question, or technically his 4th question, but we need not dwell on that, which is, how do you handle right speech at work with regard to chatter, gossip, etc., without making yourself to a complete outsider. As we all know, gossip brings people together. I really don't talk much at work. I've kind of got a reputation for just kind of keeping to myself, just doing my job and minding my own business. There are a few talkative guys who will, come up and talk to me, and, we're kind of friends, and I might joke around a little bit. But as a general rule, I really don't talk much to other people other than work-related stuff, which is probably best. There are some guys that are just like talking all the time, and they don't get nearly as much work done. And I do have somewhat of a commendable work ethic. At least I have a reputation for that. So I'm 61 years old, and I'm like climbing around on freight inside of a van, like a monkey, like securing it with straps to the wall so it doesn't fall over. And a lot of people just don't bother with it, and the stuff just all goes sideways. I've seen some of these freight vans after they've gone a couple hundred miles, and then you open it up and try to unload it, and sometimes it's just a mess. So let's see here. How do I handle right speech at work, chatter, and gossip? I mean, I do make jokes and stuff sometimes. So, I mean, telling a joke isn't just like some kind of unmitigated evil. Just passing, somebody asked me, what are you going to do this weekend? That kind of stuff. It's like, might as well answer. But, I mean, you're just answering a question and not really like gossiping very much. I mean, there is a little bit of gossip. Sometimes it's interesting. Why is it that so-and-so stopped coming to work? It's, he broke probation. He actually had an ankle monitor. That kind of thing. That's kind of interesting. But, I mean, I don't think we're going to be reborn as cockroaches or go to hell for, making the occasional witticism or just briefly passing the time of day with somebody. So, but I do keep it down to a relative minimum. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Zenithoid. And we've been going for a little over 2 hours. I'm not exactly sure how. I think we're going to be less than 3 hours, though. Maybe way less than 3 hours. So anyway, Zenithoid says, if given the opportunity, would you go on the Joe Rogan podcast? And I highly doubt that I would ever be invited to go on the Joe Rogan podcast. But if I got invited and I could take the time off from work to go to Texas or wherever it is that the Joe Rogan podcast is recorded, yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting. Sure. I think Joe Rogan would be kind of an interesting person to hang out with, although I wouldn't be smoking dope before or during the podcast, because then I'd get like halfway through a sentence and like, what was I just talking about? What were we just saying? That kind of stuff. Cannabis just like obliterates my short-term memory for some reason. So I'm just going to move on to Zenithoid's second question, which is, were you at all affected by the 2004 earthquake and tsunami of the Indian Ocean? And I wasn't. I heard about it after it happened, but my brother was. My brother just happened to be in Thailand on the beach at Phuket, which is like, I mean, it got hit by the tsunami, but it just turned out that there was an island right off the coast that like absorbed most of the impact of the tsunami, and so my brother was fine. My mother didn't know if he was alive or dead for several days after the tsunami hit. She knew he was in Thailand, in like southern Thailand on the beach, but he was fine. And he might be in Thailand right now. He works in Alaska mostly, and then it takes most of his time off in Thailand. So I guess I answered that question. I'm going to move on to Zenithoid's third question, which is, who was the smartest or most interesting Burmese person you met as a monk, other than Shui in Seattle? Well, the person that first comes to mind is a person I used to affectionately refer to as crusty old Uwimala, who was the abbot of a monastery in central, like Upper Burma. And he had the most Western attitude of any Burmese person I ever met, probably, including Burmese people who had lived in America for decades. And he was half Chinese. He was like on both sides of his family. Both of his parents were half Chinese, half Burmese. And I mean, he could fix anything. He said he could fix anything except for a helicopter. He didn't know how to fix helicopters. But just about anything else, I mean, he just knew how to do everything. And he was the monk I was referring to, possibly in the previous Q&A or a recent Q&A. He had no use for the human race. He did not like people, and most monks couldn't live at his monastery for very long because he'd just start disliking them and driving them out. But he liked me for some reason, and he liked animals. And so he had this one dog I called Uncle Wiggly, who started getting like colon cancer or something. And Uwimala, who loved animals, just every day he's got his finger up that dog's butt helping it to poop, just because it was like constipated if Uwimala didn't help him. And I mean, he had some kind of weird ideas because he'd read Burmese books about, like, you know, World War II, Nazi Germany and stuff, and get these strange ideas. He had this idea that Hitler was possessed by some sort of demonic entity and that kind of thing. I mean, maybe he was, for all I know, but he was very intelligent and just very skillful at a lot of different things. But he was just sort of a crusty, disagreeable Schopenhauer type. And he had lots of dosa. And there was a French monk who stayed there for a while, and Uwimala just couldn't stand him. But he couldn't really kick him out because the French monk was senior to him. So, I mean, sometimes when you talk to him, I mean, you could just see the cheek muscles all clenched. You'd be talking through his clenched teeth. And I realized that dosa in Pali, which usually is translated as anger, I mean, it's very different from hate. Because Uwimala, I never saw him yelling. You know, he wasn't that kind of dosa, but I mean, he definitely had some hate in him, mainly towards other humans. And like I say, for some reason, he liked me. But there was one other thing I was going to mention about him, and now it just kind of flashed into my mind, and I was thinking, oh yeah, I should mention that too, and then I didn't. So it just faded back out again. He was really good at chess. He was like a chess master. He bragged a lot about how good he was at fixing stuff and like the chess competitions he won as a young man before he became a monk and all that. Oh, what else? There's a lot of stuff I could say about Uwimala. I mean, he was very possessive with regard to stuff in general and with regard to this monastery that he was the abbot of. And he would notice, like, there was a beehive would appear in a tree. It was like 40 acres of land this monastery was. And I mean, he would know where all the beehives were. You know, he didn't trust humans, but like with regard to nature, he was just like in tune, kind of a Schopenhauer type. But I might as well just move on to the next question. I think he's still a monk now. He was continually talking about wanting to drop out, but I think he's still in robes in Burma. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Philalethes, who says, you often refer to yourself as a heretic Buddhist, but in what ways are you a totally conventional Buddhist, or in what matters do you adhere to Theravada orthodoxy? Well, when I was a monk, I was very orthodox and strict with regard to Vinaya, just following the rules of monastic discipline. And it didn't really matter to me whether the Buddha really taught him or not. It's like when I signed up, you know, part of the deal was I follow these rules. So regardless of whether these rules were laid down by Gautama Buddha himself or not, I'm going to follow these rules. With regard to philosophy, the Atthakavagga, I've taken to heart, like a lot of the teachings, most of the teachings of the Atthakavagga. Stuff like the Four Noble Truths, especially the first three, are fairly self-evident. So I can accept that. No self, I definitely accept that more than a great many Buddhists do, especially Western Buddhists. The three marks of existence, karma as a mental state, that kind of stuff, and like a lot of the basics. So there's some things that I don't really accept, like a lot of the devotionalistic stuff where the Buddha is just bragging about how wonderful he is and how people should worship him. The 12 links of dependent co-arising, I don't have much use for. The entire Abhidhamma Pitaka, I think would be better off if it just didn't exist. So that definitely makes me a heretic. When you are rejecting an entire Pitaka of the Tipitaka, then you're a heretic, which makes most Western monks heretics, because most Western monks really don't have much use for Abhidhamma. Like 70%, maybe 3/4 of Western monks just do not consider Abhidhamma to be legitimate, genuine teachings of the Buddha. So, with regard to a lot of it, I can accept a lot of just the basics of Buddhist philosophy. And as a monk, I followed the rules strictly for up until the very end, up until my last trip to America, and which resulted in me becoming a layperson living here in South Carolina. So I guess, I could go into greater detail, but I got lots of questions to answer, and I've already answered lots of questions. So let's just move on to Philalethes' second question, which is there any cool story starring yourself you've never told us before? And I'm sure there are cool stories starring myself. Like, I was thinking, what stories have I not told already? And there's maybe one story that I haven't told, at least not in years. It was before I was a monk. It used to be before I was a monk. Part of my spiritual practice is hiking alone into a wilderness area, and as often as not taking LSD, just alone out in this completely wild area. So there was this one time as a lay person, I went out into the Pasayten wilderness area, which was considered the wildest part of Washington state. The state of Washington is the only place in the state of Washington that had grizzly bears, wolves, caribou, moose, that kind of thing. I would carry fireworks with me, like a whistling Pete, the ones that scream and shoot sparks, just in case I came across a grizzly bear. I figured that'd be about my best chance, is just start shooting screaming sparks at it. So anyways, I was camping, and I wouldn't use a tent. I would just sleep under the open sky in a sleeping bag. And one night, it was on this trip, I forgot to bring a stocking cap. Like, I guess they're called a beanie now, like an elastic woven kind of cloth cap, like Tim Pool wears all the time because he's bald and is embarrassed about it, apparently. So I forgot to bring my stocking cap, and so the mice were getting in my hair. And I'd keep waking up, I keep getting the mice out of my hair. And finally, I'm thinking, I'm just going to have to let mice crawl in my hair tonight if I'm going to get any sleep. So I just make this determination. I'm just going to let them crawl in my hair. Fuck it. I got to get some sleep tonight. And then sure enough, within just a few minutes, I hear like little rustling noises near my head. And then all of a sudden, my entire sleeping bag just starts getting jerked sideways like this. And so I turn and look, and I'm looking right into the face of a porcupine about the size of a Cocker Spaniel dog. And apparently the porcupine had like bitten into my sleeping bag and was yanking on it. And so I start yelling at it to go away. And the porcupine, it's like the honey badger. It don't give a shit because, it's pretty much safe from anything. There's a few animals that have learned how to kill porcupines, but apparently it didn't consider me to be one of them. And so me yelling at it to go away and leave me alone had no effect whatsoever. So then I started reaching around and found some like pine cones on the ground and just started throwing pine cones at it, and having something actually hit it. It was something it wasn't used to at all. It just took off running. And then finally I was able to get some sleep with mice in my hair. speaking of mice, there was a different time I went on a backpacking trip to Anderson Glacier in Olympic National Park with my buddy Steve. And we were warned about this camping site. We were going to camp in this campsite, and this hiker told us, you got to be careful about the mice are going to rape your pack if you stay there. And I had one candy bar left. We were hiking out. We had one last day. I had one candy bar left. It was a Snickers bar. And so just to make sure, to protect it from the mice, I put it in my shirt pocket. And I was inside the sleeping bag with this Snickers bar inside my shirt pocket, in the sleeping bag. The next morning I get up, I pull out my Snickers bar, and a mouse had been chewing on this Snickers bar, and it chewed from underneath. It got inside my shirt and chewed up through the shirt into the pocket to get to that Snickers bar. So I was sleeping. I was completely oblivious to the fact that there was this mouse inside my shirt ganking my fucking Snickers bar. But I suppose I could think up more stories. Cool stories starring myself, but I think I'm just going to move on to Philalethes' third question, which is as follows. How would you rate Islam among the world religions from an esoteric point of view? And do you think Islam gets an overly bad rep, or is it not bad enough? So that's kind of two questions too, isn't it? I think somebody else is going on a list. Under the P's. So, how would I rate Islam among the world religions from an esoteric point of view? I mean, the only esoteric Islam I'm aware of is Sufism. And I have read that Muhammad probably would have denounced Sufism. Islam itself is not a particularly esoteric religion. It's pretty secular. So, how would I rate Islam among the world religions? I mean, I would consider, like, just going with the scriptures, the Quran, I might put it slightly above the Old Testament. If I had to rank all the world scriptures I have read in order of wisdom, then the Quran and the Old Testament would both be in the bottom half. They'd be less than 50% towards the top, and maybe the Quran would be just like one notch above the Old Testament. There is some wisdom in the Quran, so it's not just total BS or any such thing. But something like the Bhagavad Gita would just blow the Quran and the Old Testament out of the water with regard to just wisdom. So, and then Sufism, I really am not well acquainted with Sufism, but it's my understanding that Sufism gets most of its esoteric wisdom from Buddhism and Hinduism. Like, it arose in like south of eastern Persia or some such, where there was contact with Buddhist and Hindu philosophy. But with regard to the second part of this question, do you think Islam gets an overly bad rep, or is it not bad enough? Yeah, I'd say probably it's not bad enough. Because, literally the founder of Islam, and this is from the Muslim sources themselves. This isn't just made up from outside of Islam. The Muslims themselves have to admit to this, that Muhammad was a warlord, a bandit who was like robbing and killing people, had people sold into slavery, women and children sold into slavery after their husbands were beheaded. He was a rapist. He notoriously was raping this one woman who was freshly a widow with her husband lying dead on the ground just a matter of feet away outside the tent. He was a warlord, pretty much like Moses was. He definitely came closer to Moses, also a warlord who was like demanding the genocide of the Canaanites. So he came closer to Moses than he did to Jesus or the Buddha. So, let's see here. So I do think that Islam, it's does not get a bad enough reputation considering the moral character of the founder of the religion. And he's considered to be like the ideal man. You know, he's the role model of Muslims. Muslim men want to be like Muhammad. So, I mean, getting married to a 9-year-old girl, killing people. So, yeah, I mean, Islam and Judaism, I mean, they had the culture they arose in had different ideas about what spirituality was about. I mean, it wasn't really spiritual. It was just like religious in a kind of emotional, like cultural kind of a sense. But I mean, I'm sure that there have been very wise Muslims, very wise Jews that to some degree, they were very wise in spite of the religion that they were born into. Anyways, enough of this. I'm just going to move on to the next question. And we are getting fairly close to the bottom here. The next question is from Enigmal Plea. It's enigma, then a capital L, and then a small lowercase pli, all one word. Enigmal Plea. An enigmal plea says, is the material body the only body a normal human has, with the mind being without form, or does one have multiple on different planes? Well, all form is perceptual. As I was already discussing, you can't have form without relations, like same as and different from. I mean, if you don't have any different from, there's not going to be any outline. There's not going to be any figure in ground. So all form is ultimately perceptual. So, I mean, you might as well forget the material body. I mean, whether the material body exists or not, as I was saying earlier, is pretty much irrelevant. So, is the material body the only body a normal human has? Well, I mean, when you're dreaming at night, you've got a body, sort of. It's a mind-made body, but then again, at some level, this body, this meat puppet, is also a mind-made body. And then you got the Hindus who say that there is a kind of astral body that I'm not sure if that would be the same as the dream body. But then you got sort of like this astral body that you're kind of in between lives, you know, like when you're up in, you know, you're going up towards the light and you're having the near-death experience, except it's really just a death experience because you're really dead this time. And, you know, you're like up in heaven with still kind of a body, you know, like in the Matrix, you've got residual self-image, kind of that kind of a body. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you really mean by a body. I mean, once you get to the idea that, I mean, it's not, there is no material body anyway, it's all mind-made, then I guess you'd become more open to the idea of different kinds of bodies, like the dream body or the astral body and that kind of thing. And, I mean, it all depends on how you look at it, I suppose. Golly. Is the material body the only body a normal human has? Well, I mean, there could be, I mean, what do you even mean by body, though? That's sort of like the sticking point here. Because, I mean, there could be like a greater form that encompasses different lifetimes. That, I mean, it's still kind of a samsaric entity and not ultimately real, but still, I mean, if you consider this person to be relatively real, then there could be like a higher level of like a 4-dimensional level that encompasses various lifetimes all into one sort of super entity that might count as a body, even though at the 3D level, it's more than one body because it's more than one lifetime. So it all depends on how you're going to interpret body. And then you got the dream body. I mean, some people would say in your dreams, that's still a kind of material world. It's just a more ethereal, subtle, or cruder kind of world than this kind of waking reality that we're living in. So it would depend a lot on how you define terms, like how you define the word body. And then it becomes even trickier if you don't accept the ultimate reality of a material universe, so that even the meat puppet is just a kind of mental image, and you've got other kinds of mental images of a body, like when you're dreaming and so forth. So I think it all depends on how you look at it, which is possibly the best answer to all questions. Is it all depends on how you look at it. But if I answered that to every single question, then people would stop watching these videos, I guess. So I'll just move on to Enigmal Please' second question here. How to differentiate between a demonic possession and one's own self, and how to get rid of it according to different schools. Well, that's kind of an interesting question, in that, like, if you read the New Testament of the Bible, it's like everyone and their sister was possessed by some kind of spirit. That's apparently how they explained a lot of things like epilepsy or certain mental illnesses, was through demonic possession. And it is possible that you can look at the same case of like some kind of insanity as like just sort of a brain malfunction, or as some sort of spirit possession. And it could be that the brain malfunction kind of leaves this gap so the spirit can get in, so that they're both true. Or it could just be that there's just two different ways of interpreting the same phenomenon. So how to differentiate between demonic possession and one's own self, how to get rid of it. I'm not sure that there is just this ironclad way of telling the difference, because it could be that you can interpret the same thing according to two different paradigms, and one will be that it's some sort of organic malfunction, and the other is that it's some sort of spirit possession. Like, I'm reminded of Jane Roberts, who was channeling the Seth material back in the 70s. And she herself wasn't quite sure if there really was this being channeled through her, or if it was just sort of a figment of her subconscious imagination. And it could be both. It could be that both were true. And I mean, ultimately, it didn't really matter all that much, I guess. Especially if you had no use for the Seth material. But yeah, it would take some kind of expert, some sort of psychic expert, maybe like a professional, like exorcist or something, who would then like look over the person and be able to decide. But in Buddhism, I mean, spirit possession is a thing. Like, there is this weird rule in the rules of monastic discipline that a monk is not allowed to eat raw meat or drink raw blood unless he is possessed by a spirit. But how do you know for sure? That's tricky. I think it would take some sort of expert to like diagnose the individual, and possibly that two different experts might disagree. They might have different diagnoses. And it's largely just a matter of what kind of paradigm you're going with, how you're going to interpret the case in a lot of cases. But how to get rid of demonic possession? Well, I mean, some, like in ancient India, when they made that rule about the eating raw meat and drinking raw blood, that some spirits do crave raw meat and blood. And this is believed in Burma to this day. Necromancers will set out raw meat and raw blood to get spirits to come to feed on it. And then they start becoming reliant on the necromancer, and then he can start commanding them. You want the raw meat next time, you're going to have to do what I say. But with regard to, yeah, I mean, that's one way of getting rid of this spirit, is just eating the raw meat and drinking the raw blood till it's satisfied, and then it lets go of you and goes away. Although, I mean, the Metta Sutta is considered to be the standard approach to like appeasing troublemaking spirits. There was one guy, he might have been autistic. When I was living in a cave in Burma, he came to visit me with his parents, and he was sort of definitely had some sort of mental abnormality going. And he was asking me, what should I do? The spirits keep bothering me. And I told him, I mean, reciting the Metta Sutta is probably about the best thing you could do. So he was doing that. I mean, if you can find like a real exorcist, and they have them in Burma too, like a Polancia, they do a lot of this kind of. A Polancia literally means like a master of the upper path, which is sort of a dharmic magician, a dharmic wizard who uses the power of dharma to do good magic, unlike, you know, like an outlancia, which is the lower path, you know, like black magic stuff. So you find somebody who's trained at exorcising spirits, and you know they may have much better luck than, you know, just watching a do-it-yourself video on YouTube on how to exorcise a spirit out of yourself. So I mean, if you have like a person with enough spiritual clout, you know, enough spiritual force, you know, they could, you know, sort of like Jesus, you know, they just command the spirit to, you know, be gone, and the spirit will leave them alone. Which kind of reminds me of the Indonesian monk that I think I've already mentioned once in this video, who he had this attendant in Indonesia who could see spirits. And one reason why he supported this monk is because he could see that the spirits just leave this monk alone. That, you know, that most people have spirits kind of hovering around them trying to influence them, because, you know, they can't really do anything at this level of reality unless they can influence some being at this level of reality, you know, to do it for them, because they don't have a body at this level of reality. And he just respected the fact that the spirits just left this monk alone. And so from a Buddhist point of view, one of the best ways to avoid spirit possession and so forth is cultivate a healthy mind. You know, meditate and live a moral life. Keep your mind clear, well balanced, have a healthy mind, and there won't be any like gaps and cracks in your mind that the spirits can, you know, they can infiltrate. So I guess I answered that one well enough, about as well as I'm able. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Raphael. And Raphael says, bit of a broad question, but what are your best arguments against the philosophy of Nietzsche? And for starters, I should say that I'm no authority on the philosophy of Nietzsche. I read his Antichrist, but the intro written by Mencken was much more interesting to me. I got more out of the intro than out of the Nietzsche's book or essay itself. I tried to read Thus Spake Zarathustra, and I got about as far as the tightrope walker who falls off the tightrope and breaks his leg. And I mean, Nietzsche's style of writing really does not resonate well with me. His whole way of thinking was kind of this surreal kind of thinking, apparently, that, I mean, it just doesn't work with me very well. So most of what I know about the philosophy of Nietzsche has been like written about the philosophy of Nietzsche. Like I've read Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, and he's got the chapter on Nietzsche. So I know that much. But the whole will to power, you know, the Superman who rises above good and evil, sort of like Raskolnikov was trying to do in Crime and Punishment, sort of like Marlon Brando or Colonel Kurtz was trying to do in Apocalypse Now, you know, where you just leave behind this whole worldly distinction of good and evil and just do what is expedient. And in Crime and Punishment and in Apocalypse Now, it didn't work. That you cannot just leave behind morality. And with regard to Nietzsche, yeah, I think just being the master of samsara rather than like transcending samsara is not really a good choice. It's not really conducive to happiness. That I don't think he really understood like how suffering is caused, you know, it's desire. That I don't think he could really appreciate that. I think Schopenhauer, who Nietzsche claimed that he was sort of like the successor of Schopenhauer. He's kind of started with Schopenhauer and then just, took it in a completely different direction than Schopenhauer was intending. But neither Nietzsche nor Schopenhauer struck me as particularly happy people. So, yeah, I think that Nietzsche was either ignorant of or just rejected the whole Buddhist idea of just Dhamma in general. I mean, he kind of despised it. He would consider it to be like slave morality, meekness and humbleness and passivity. That's slave morality. Whereas, his idea of the Superman was, sort of like the ancient man of action, Hercules or somebody. So my best arguments against Nietzsche, I think he just did not understand what results in happiness and wisdom and what is sort of does the opposite. But as I say, I'm no authority on Nietzsche. I think he was mistaken with regard to eternal recurrence too, which I mentioned in the previous Q&A, I'm pretty sure. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, and we're down to the last questioner. And the last questioner has the unique honor of being Stellar Supreme, formerly known as Lieberlam, and also known as various other names that we need not get into. So Stellar Supreme, etc., says, what are your thoughts on the myth of Zarathustra and Persian mythology more broadly? And I'm relatively ignorant with regard to Persian culture. Persian mythology, I know almost nothing about it. Zarathustra, I have read, like when I was a college student, I read some of the Zendavesta, which is like the main scripture of the what do you call them, the Zoroastrians, and it really didn't strike me as all that profound. I mean, could be that I was just a college student reading some early pioneering translation from Max Muller's Sacred Books of the East series. But see, the myth Zarathustra, I mean, I think he was like Bactrian. I think he arose in like the city of Bactra in what is now northwestern Afghanistan. And it's, some people say that his religion is the oldest existing religion. It's relatively old. And the Persians were Zoroastrians up until they were forcibly converted to Islam. But the whole idea of like the good God and the evil God in this eternal war, I really don't have much use for that. I'm certainly not a dualist, but it is kind of I don't know if sad is the right word, but I mean Persia was like a world power. It was really a dominant culture. It was like the arch enemy of Rome for a long time, the arch enemy of the Greeks, and then the arch enemy of the Roman Empire. For a long time, they were a great civilization, and it's like people just don't know very much about their civilization, partly because, like when the Muslims come in, they just sort of like homogenize everything. Everything has to be in accordance with Islam, and so all the pre-Islamic stuff is like suppressed to some degree. But yeah, like Zoroastrianism, Zarathustra, I really do not know that much about him. It's similar to Sanskrit. I mean, the language that the Zendavesta is composed in is very similar to Sanskrit. And it's my understanding that for some reason the Persians had like the Indo-Europeans had this myth of the gods and the Titans who had this war, and the gods won, and they like imprisoned the Titans at the foot of this mountain. And they had that in the ancient Greeks believed that, also the ancient Indians believed that. But for some reason, the Persians, I mean, it could be that I'm just not understanding this, but the Asuras, like in Indian, the Titans, so-called, were called the Asuras, the good god of Zoroastrianism is Ahura Mazda, which is Ahura is the Persian way of pronouncing Asura. That the S in Sanskrit is at least sometimes replaced by H. Like Soma, the Soma sacrifice in India was pronounced Homa by the Persians. So I don't understand fully why it is that the Persians kind of went against pretty much everybody else and had the Devas be the bad guys, and the Asuras were the ones who wound up winning the primordial war between the gods and the Titans. It could be I'm just not understanding it at all. So I think I should finish off my designated beverage. My designated primary beverage, or DPB, and open up the emergency backup beverage. Even though I've only got 2 last questions to answer. So, see, Stellar Supreme, etc., says, would you ever consider appearing on the New Thinking Aloud interview series to discuss the esoteric and supernatural features of archaic Buddhism? Well, I'd be willing to appear on the Joe Rogan program too, like I already specified, like I already indicated. I don't know if I've ever seen the New Thinking Aloud interview series, but as a general rule, if somebody asks me to be on some show, I'm usually willing to go for it. That I have been asked before, especially when I was still a monk, to appear, in an interview on this or that YouTube channel, and I have gone for it. But yeah, I don't see why not. Esoteric and supernatural features of archaic Buddhism. I'm not so sure that there are very many esoteric or supernatural features of archaic Buddhism, but I could talk about how there aren't any, or not very many anyhow. So I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme's third and last question, and the last question of this show. And we might just squeak under 3 hours, or maybe squeak over 3 hours. And he says, do you feel that your nervous system was sharpened by your intensive training while ordained as a monk? And it's hard to say exactly. I had a relatively sharp mind before I became a monk. So, a lot of the sharpness, I assume, I already had at the time that I became a monk. I'm not exactly sure what a sharpened nervous system really means, unless it's just more like more definition, like more, not just more clarity, but like more incisive or powerful thought or some such. And it is possible, just like the meditation, and also just avoiding so many distractions, and also like intoxicants and so forth that kind of dull the mind in lay people. That, it didn't happen with me. I was just like camping for 20 something years in Burma, just, living out in the woods and, breathing fresh air and drinking creek water or well water, and just eating essentially fresh organic food, maybe some salted fish thrown in. And so, it could be just like clean living kind of helped my mind remain kind of clear and sharp. And, it was relatively clear and sharp beforehand, which helped me to become a monk in the first place. But also, I do think that just mindfulness and meditation did cause like a greater sensitivity, a greater awareness of stuff going on in dark corners in my mind, or, subliminal kind of stuff. I would be more aware of that than the average guy, I suppose, possibly as a result of mindfulness practice and like the cultivation of relatively deep meditative states. But it's really hard to say. In a way, it's kind of a logical fallacy to say, if I had done things differently, it would be different. So, you can't really know for sure to what extent the sharpness of my nervous system was caused by my being a monk, or whether it would have been pretty much that way regardless. Although I do think that just the clean living, the simplicity of life, and just practicing mindfulness and like meditation did help. But to what extent it helped, I'm not exactly sure. But it certainly didn't have a bad effect on it. And so I guess that's it. I guess I'm done at 2 hours and 59 minutes. So by golly, and like I almost never say at the beginning, and all you should say at the beginning, if you got any questions about something you think that I could answer, like early Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism, Buddhism in general, this Indian spirituality, Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, Western culture. I've got a fairly good understanding of Western culture, meditation, monasticism, Burma, that kind of stuff. If you think I can answer it, then think maybe I can answer it anyway. Then go ahead and ask. And please, no more than 3 questions. No more than 3 question marks, please, per episode. And hit the like button if you like this. I assume if you made it this far, you at least kind of liked it. I mean, if you just hate watching it, you can do that too. You can hit the like button just because you hate watching it, regardless of any hate I might accidentally be promulgating. And also subscribe if you haven't done so already, and be happy.